Chapter 24:36. The impact of this scene on the crowd was much stronger than the previous episode. After a short moment of silence, the crowd was in an uproar. Am I seeing things? Little Hachi is actually starting to form the pill. She actually beat the 8th divine emissary? Doesn't this mean that her strength is even higher than the 8th? That might not be the case, right? Although everyone was refining Supreme Doctor level pills, there was still a certain level of difference between pills of the same level. Maybe the pill refined by the 8th divine emissary is better than hers? No way. I saw it clearly. Little Hachi is preparing to refine the green scarlet fire pill. That was one of the top 3 pills among the honorable doctor level pills. The 8th divine emissary is refining the divination pill. Although it is usually called the number 1 supreme doctor pill, it is actually not much stronger than the green scarlet fire pill. Moreover, the 8th divine emissary is a medical sage. No matter how much she suppresses her strength, she shouldn't be slower than Little Hachi. There were many supreme doctor experts in the illusory god palace. Other than a small number of them who had entered the life and death juncture, most of them were watching this scene from outside the illusory god palace. Others didn't understand, but they understood it the most. With the current progress, Little Hachi was indeed ahead by a bit. After listening to these people's explanations, the surrounding crowd gradually understood. When they looked at Xu Jing again, their gazes were much more complicated. This was the 8th divine emissary not using her full strength, or... Xu Jing heard all the words clearly. All the gazes made her feel uneasy. She secretly gritted her teeth, and a trace of resentment quickly flashed across her eyes. When she saw Little Hachi starting to form the pill, she knew something was wrong. As expected. As soon as this matter came out, the others immediately began to suspect her. Xu Jing was very sullen in her heart, and there was even a trace of anger in her embarrassment. Because, she really didn't hold back. As a divine emissary, how could she purposely go easy in a life and death juncture? The first divine emissary was watching from behind. Moreover, the moment she saw Little Hachi participating in the competition, she had already made up her mind to teach her a lesson. As long as Little Hachi was defeated, there was only one outcome, death. Xu Jing had been holding a grudge against her for a long time, and he had long wanted to get rid of her. However, due to various reasons, it had been delayed until now. Now that such an opportunity had suddenly appeared, how could she bear to miss it? But who knew? Little Hachi's strength was rising rapidly. Compared to her, she wasn't any weaker. She even managed to form the pill before her. Xu Jing thought that this was a great humiliation. Her face felt like it had been slapped twice, and it was burning with pain. She glanced at Little Hachi from the corner of her eye. Inside the medicine cauldron, a dazzling flame burned fiercely as several kinds of medicinal herbs gradually condensed. Gradually, there was already a fist-sized spherical medicinal pill. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. Little Hachi's pill refinement could be said to be extremely smooth. As long as there were no accidents later on, then, it was basically a success. She took a deep breath and did not want to be outdone. She started to form the pill. Condense. Boom. With a thought, the flame in the medicine cauldron burned wildly again, enveloping all the medicinal herbs in it and condensing them in the middle at the same time. Soon, the same round pill appeared in the middle of the flame. After refining thousands of medicinal herbs, they condensed at the same time and formed the pill. Such a method. As expected of Xu Jing. Fan Yinshao praised with one hand behind her back. Unlike Little Hachi's method of adding ingredients bit by bit, this method of forming the pill in one go would make the pill better in terms of appearance and internal medicinal effects. Of course, the difficulty was also higher. Although she was one step behind Little Hachi just now, this move undoubtedly won back some face for Xu Jing. Yu Qian frowned and said in a low voice, "She is the medical sage. If she can't even do this, what will she look like?" One had to know that Xu Jing represented the palace of the illusory god and all the divine envoys. Being surpassed so easily, even if the competition was not over yet, it still made people feel very uncomfortable. The smile on Fan Yunxiao's face gradually faded. She shut her mouth in embarrassment and swallowed the rest of her words. Yu Qian usually looked gentle, but he was extremely arrogant and even conceited. Of course, he was not happy to see such a situation. Thinking of this, Fan Yunxiao suddenly turned around and looked at the figure on the steps of the palace of the illusory god. The man in the grayish-blue brocade robe was tall and straight, and his expression was indifferent. There was no emotion on his face. Fan Yunxiao retracted her gaze and could not help but think in her heart, the first divine envoy is still the first divine envoy after all. He is not like the second divine envoy, who can't keep his composure. That person is watching from above and hasn't expressed his opinion yet. Is it appropriate for the second divine envoy to be so impatient? Of course, these thoughts were only in Fan Yunxiao's heart. She did not dare to show it. No matter who it was, these two were people she could not afford to offend. Little Hachi is really amazing. Mu Hongyu sighed. You're almost forcing the eighth divine envoy into a corner. Chu Luiyue smiled and looked at her. Hongyu, lower your voice. It won't be good if someone else hears you. Anyone with a brain could guess who this someone else was. However, even though Chu Luiyue said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice. Xiao Ran silently looked at the two of them. Are you guys really not doing this on purpose? He did not know if it was an illusion, but the eighth divine envoy's expression seemed to have turned colder. Mu Hongyu stuck out her tongue. I'm telling the truth. Can't I even speak the truth in the palace of the illusory god? Although she was not a celestial physician, she had seen many people concoct pills over the years. In addition, she was very smart. With just one look, she could tell what Xu Jing was thinking. In fact, everyone present, as long as they were not blind, could tell. After all, her performance was too obvious. Of course, this matter could not be entirely blamed on her. If she did not seize the opportunity to counterattack, she would really be suppressed by little Hachi. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, it was little Hachi. Who did not know that these two had a long-standing grudge? It would be strange if she could tolerate little Hachi stepping on her head and winning the entire hall. Chu Luiyue nodded in agreement. Little Hachi's performance is indeed much better than I expected. As she said this, she glanced at Mu Hongyu from the corner of her eye. Although her expression was normal, her almond-shaped eyes were still staring at the arena. She followed her line of sight and looked in that direction. A meaningful smile immediately appeared on her face. Then, she sighed softly. I'm not worried about little Hachi. It's just that young Master Jian. Mu Hongyu immediately turned around. Her eyes were filled with nervousness. What's wrong with him? Chapter 24:37. Chu Luiyue suddenly stopped talking. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Hongyu, why are you so nervous? I am not nervous. Mu Hongyu subconsciously retorted. When she met Chu Luiyue's clear eyes, which seemed to see through everything, she felt a little guilty and looked away. I just thought that since we're all friends, I was just asking. She had seen Fang Suning's tragic death clearly. Naturally, she couldn't help but think of Jian Fengqi. Little Hachi's side was basically guaranteed to win, but Jian Fengqi, if he wasn't careful, he might really lose his life here. Although she often bickered with Jian Fengqi, she still didn't want anything to happen to him. Chu Luiyue didn't expose her. He smiled and said, I say. First young Master Jian is about to form his pill. Mu Hongyu was stunned. What? Chu Luiyue lifted his chin. Mu Hongyu subconsciously looked up and saw that the flames in Jian Fengqi's medicine cauldron were suddenly burning wildly. Condense. With a clear shout, the herbs in the medicine cauldron began to quickly gather towards the center. Very quickly, a pill the size of a fist appeared in the flames. Mu Hongyu's eyes widened slightly. Luyu, just now he sounded so worried. What was he trying to do? Chu Luiyue coughed and said seriously, I just thought that first young Master Jian was a little behind. It's really a pity that he only got third place. Mu Hongyu was confused. Of the two people in front, one was the 8th divine envoy, Xu Jing, and the other was Little 8. Wasn't it already very good that he was able to fight his way out of the encirclement and obtain the third place? Looking at the smile that slowly appeared on Chu Luiyue's lips, she suddenly came back to her senses. Lu Yu. You did it on purpose. Chu Luiyue lowered his voice. Shoo. If eldest young Master Jian knows that you are so worried about him, he will become arrogant again. Mu Hongyu's face immediately turned red. She bit her lips and wanted to defend herself, but when she thought of her performance just now, she really didn't know what to say. She could only puff up her cheeks and keep quiet. After all, she was indeed worried that Jian Fengqi would not be able to pass the test. Chu Luiyue silently made a mental note for first young Master Jian. This brat owed her a lot of favors now. Jian Fengqi's pill formation attracted a lot of attention. After all, compared to Little Hachi, his reputation in the illusory god palace wasn't as big. Now, he was almost following Little Hachi's pill formation closely, which immediately made many people look at him in a new light. That person is Jian Fengqi or something. Why is he so powerful? I remember that he was with Shang Guanyu and the others. I only knew that he seemed to have broken through to the Supreme Doctor level, but I didn't expect that now. Hiss. Then what's going on with Shang Guanyu? It's fine that he's abnormal, but the people around him are also so amazing. Do you want others to live? If there were only one or two people, perhaps it wouldn't be considered Chu Luiyue's fault. But now, most of the people who performed well in the illusory god palace were extremely close to her. How could people not think about it? Some people's gazes fell on Chu Luiyue again, full of suspicion and sizing him up. Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye. Jian Fengqi had been tempered by her for so many years, so it wasn't surprising that he had this ability. Time passed. On the 4 competition areas, the competition was going on separately. More and more people failed. Without a doubt, these people were killed on the spot the moment they lost. The smell of blood in the air seemed to be heavier. The onlookers also gradually quieted down. The atmosphere was solemn and cold. Including the celestial physician area that Chu Luiyue cared about the most, for supreme doctors had already fallen one after another. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. This life and death situation is indeed difficult. In other words, it was cruel and bloody to the extreme. Xiao Ran heard her voice and shook his head helplessly. It can't be helped. Everyone wants to become the strongest existence in the world, but it's not that easy. The moment this choice was made, everything was decided. It's not easy for Supreme God, Supreme Doctor, Supreme Grandmaster, Supreme Artificer to grow. It's a pity to use this competition to decide their life and death. Chu Luiyue sighed. Xiao Ran heard this and shook his head. You're right, but there are thousands of cultivators in the world, and everyone is at the top. Those who can't compete will naturally be eliminated. This is the rule of the illusory god palace. It's not that easy to cultivate and become an expert. Those who can break through the encirclement and become a top expert, which one of them didn't go through hardships? Not to mention the others, just these few divine envoys, back then, they also went through extremely fierce battles to reach their current positions. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue's heart moved, and she turned to look at the divine envoys standing not far away. No, she didn't admit that Xiao Ran's words were indeed very reasonable. The divine envoys were indeed high and mighty, but this identity was also a symbol of their strength. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the person on the 9th step. After a moment, she retracted her gaze. After a while, the pill in Little Hachi's medicine cauldron was finally condensed to the size of a longan. Lines of lines stretched across it, shining brilliantly. Waves of invisible energy waves began to spread in all directions. Buzz, this energy collided with the medicine cauldron, and immediately a distant sound was heard. Little Hachi's eyes were bright. It's about to succeed. She carefully controlled the flame in the medicine cauldron and carried out the final refinement. At the same time, Xu Jing's brows were slightly furrowed. She still needed the last quarter of an hour to complete the refinement of the pill. But little Hachi's side had already begun to finish. Moreover, from the current situation, little Hachi's green glass scarlet fire pill was most likely going to succeed. Thinking of this, Xu Jing's heart felt like it was on fire. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. What should I do in order to win this match beautifully and get rid of little 8 at the same time? Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the illusory god palace. Hearing the commotion, Chu Luiyue glanced over. 2 familiar faces came into view. Chapter 2438. It was Jiu Long and Shi Yan. She hadn't seen them since the last time they met at the Godslayer Mound. She looked at the two of them carefully. On the surface, there wasn't much difference from when he first saw them. However, they seemed to have lost some weight, and their expressions also seemed to be a little tired. It was clear that they had not been living well during this period of time. Jiu Long and Shi Yan stopped in front of the Holy Chaos Jade and bowed respectfully. Jiu Long, Shi Yan, is late. Please forgive me, First Divine Envoy. Mu Qinghe's expression didn't change. It's fine. Shi Yan, the artifact master competition has begun. Go ahead. Yes. Shi Yan nodded and walked over. Jiu Long walked around the Holy Chaos Jade and headed inside. Suddenly, he stopped and narrowed his eyes. Chu Luiyue raised her brows slightly, met his gaze, and calmly greeted him. Ninth Divine Envoy, long time no see. How have you been? Jiu Long's mouth twitched. How could she not know if they were doing well? If not for her, he and Shi Yan wouldn't have been imprisoned in the illusionary god sea and suffered for so long. But Jiu Long only dared to think about it. He didn't dare to say it out loud. She was the emperor's subordinate. Initially, he was unaware of the other party's background, so it was one thing for him to offend the latter. But now, he had already suffered. How could he make the same mistake again? Jiu Long took a deep breath and forced a smile on her face. I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. As soon as he said this, everyone was speechless. What was wrong with the Ninth Divine Envoy? Why was he so polite to Chu Luiyue? Everyone looked at Jiu Long and Chu Luiyue suspiciously. Anyone could tell that something was wrong. Even Chu Luiyue was stunned. The last time they met in the Godslayer Mound, the Ninth Divine Envoy was arrogant and bossy. He didn't care about her or the 7 Childu Wind at all. Why did his attitude change so much in the blink of an eye? Just as she was about to ask something, Jiu Long spoke first. If there's nothing else, I'll head over first. Chu Luiyue. Go ahead. Jiu Long heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. He turned around and left in a hurry. From the looks of it, it was as if someone was chasing after a debt. Su Li and the others all looked at Chu Luiyue. For a moment, the atmosphere was extremely strange. After a long while, Xiaoran could not help but ask, "You are friends with the Ninth Divine Envoy?" Chu Luiyue thought for a moment, then said faintly, "He almost killed Qihan and Lu Feng. He even wanted to snatch something from me. Does this count?" Xiaoran. Then why is he like this? Chu Luiyue shrugged. How did she know? Back then, the two of them had mysteriously disappeared. Now, their attitude was even stranger. She couldn't figure it out either. Furthermore, even though Jiu Long appeared to be very polite to her on the surface, in reality, there was a feeling of avoidance. There was clearly a problem. But she didn't seem to have done anything, did she? Seeing that Chu Luiyue was also in a daze, the few of them could only put away their doubts. Only Su Li murmured, "These divine envoys are really unpredictable." Jiu Long came to Yu Qian and the others and was also silently interrogated by everyone. Of course, he knew why they were looking at him like that, but he couldn't say anything now. Thus, Jiu Long had no choice but to bite the bullet and walk over. As soon as he stood still, Fan Yunxiao couldn't help but ask, Jiu Long, what's wrong with you? Jiu Long's heart skipped a beat. No, nothing. Nothing? If nothing, why are you treating Sheng Guanyu like this? There are so many people here, but you only greeted her. Jiu Long broke out in cold sweat. How was he supposed to answer this? He subconsciously raised his head and looked at Mu Qinghe, who was standing above. When he and Shi Yan were punished to the illusionary god Ocean, the first divine envoy had warned them not to spread this matter. Since she was the emperor's person, then this identity. Of course, the emperor had to be willing to reveal it. Now that the emperor hadn't arrived yet, he didn't have the guts to reveal this matter. Thus, he could only endure it. I didn't. Before he could finish speaking, a loud sound suddenly came from behind. For a moment, everyone looked in that direction. Yu Qian frowned. She's about to form the pill. This she wasn't referring to the eighth divine envoy, Xu Jing, but Little Hachi. Following the heavy and melodious sound of the collision, the pill in the medicine cauldron was finally completed. Little Hachi was delighted. She immediately stretched out her hand and was about to take it. However, at this moment, an even more shocking sound of collision suddenly came from beside her. Boom! In an instant, flames soared and sparks flew everywhere. It was Xu Jing. Following closely behind, Little Hachi finished refining the pill. She slammed her hand on the medicine cauldron. A vigorous and astonishing power instantly began to spread out in all directions. No one saw that her fingertips, which were pressed tightly against the medicine cauldron, moved slightly. A hidden force quietly spread toward Little Hachi. Little Adi was shocked and had no time to do anything else. His first reaction was to pounce forward and protect that green-glazed scarlet fire pill. Bang! That tyrannical and ferocious aura instantly slammed into her body. Pfff, her body shook, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Digression, 5th update, around 12:30 p.m. Chapter 2439. Little Hachi. Chu Luiyue was shocked and immediately ran in that direction. Chihan did not hesitate and followed closely behind. Su Li and the others were stunned for a moment. Seeing this, they did not care about anything else and rushed forward. However, when Chu Luiyue arrived outside the competition area, she was suddenly stopped by an invisible force. Mu Qinghe's voice was cold and indifferent. No one is allowed to come near the life and death juncture. Chu Luiyue suddenly turned her head and stared at that figure. Although there was still a distance between them, she could still clearly see the undisguised coldness on that face. When he met her gaze, his expression did not change at all. It was bone-chillingly cold. Chu Luiyue gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. At this moment, Xu Jing leaped and put the divination pill into the jade box. Crack! As the jade box was sealed, she landed lightly on the ground. A rich medicinal fragrance spread in the air. Obviously, this medicinal pill of hers had been successfully refined. However, Little Hachi, who was not far away, was in a completely different situation. The impact of the force just now was too sudden. She only wanted to protect the pill and did not have time to set up a defense for herself. This time, she directly crashed into the medicine cauldron. The corners of her mouth and chest were stained with blood. It was bright red and glaring. However, her complexion was extremely pale. It was obvious that she had suffered severe internal injuries. At this moment, she was half leaning on the side of the medicine cauldron. She supported herself with one hand, and her knuckles were white. Little Hachi. Are you okay? Chu Luiyue's heart was burning like crazy. Little Hachi raised her hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. Moss. Master, don't worry. I'm fine, she spoke slowly, but she was unprecedentedly weak. Chu Luiyue's heart instantly felt like it was being squeezed tightly by something. Fine? How is this fine? Little Hachi licked her lips. A rich, sweet, and fishy taste filled her mouth and tongue. She slowly raised her head and looked at Xu Jing. Her usually enchanting and charming eyes were now filled with a cold luster. Eighth Oracle, what's the point of a sneak attack? Xu Jing's expression was calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Huh, Little Hachi seemed to have heard a joke and laughed coldly. You don't know? Do you dare to say that you didn't take advantage of the opportunity to secretly make a move on me and destroy my pill? Xu Jing's expression. What I'm refining is the number 1 pill of the senior doctor, divination pill. When I was forming the pill, it would cause a huge commotion. It was normal, and I didn't do it on purpose. Besides, no one else was affected, but you were the one who got into trouble. Shouldn't you look for the reason yourself? What? Are you saying that something happened to me at the last moment? Eighth Divine Emissary, my refining process has been very smooth. In fact, I even completed the pill before you. That's not impossible. Xu Jing said indifferently. After all, when it comes to refining pills, no one knows what will happen until the very last moment. You said that I deliberately targeted you. Do you have any evidence? Little Hachi swallowed a mouthful of blood. Xu Jing was extremely cunning. Under the situation of the energy riot just now, she wouldn't leave any traces at all. Just based on her words alone, how could anyone be convinced? Good. Good. I've really underestimated you. Little Hachi closed her eyes. Her lips curled into an impudent and provocative smile. It seems that the slap I gave you that day at Herb Mountain was far from enough. If I had known this day would come, I would have slapped your face until it was swollen. Let's see how thick-skinned you are to say such words in front of everyone. Xu Jing's expression finally changed. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm talking nonsense. Why are you licking your face and spouting nonsense? Little Hachi's vision turned black, but she was still holding on with her anger. She sneered. Why, as the 8th Divine Envoy, do you feel embarrassed after losing to me? So unscrupulous. Little Hachi's words were so fierce that Xu Jing was almost speechless. After all, there were many people around. There were many things that she couldn't say. Thus, she endured it again and again before finally saying, I don't want to argue with you about this. There's no need to pay attention to slander. But, your Emerald Scarlet Fire pill has been destroyed. Then, you've lost this life and death trial. What she meant was that she wanted to take Little Hachi's life. Chu Luiyue heard this and immediately shouted in a deep voice, How dare you? Xu Jing turned her head and glanced at her. A faint and sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Why, Shengguanyu, do you think you can interfere in this life and death trial? Today, Little Hachi must die. Chu Luiyue stared at her. She had been watching very carefully before. Little Hachi's alchemy had been very smooth and there hadn't been any problems. It was Xu Jing who had secretly tampered with the alchemy that led to this situation. She pursed her lips coldly. Of course, I don't have the right to do so. But, the 8th Divine Envoy's character has really opened my eyes. Xu Jing's chest tightened. Chu Luiyue had already looked at Mu Qinghe. You're in control of the competition area. Just now, you should know best whether or not someone had secretly tampered with the alchemy, right? Xu Jing's heart sank and she looked over as well. First Divine Envoy, such an unreasonable person should be severely punished. Moreover, there was also Little 8. Since he had failed, he should be executed immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, several rays of light flew up from Little Hachi's feet and wrapped around her. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly sank. However, at this moment, a sharp sword suddenly pierced through the air and flew toward them. Chi! Those few streams of light were instantly crushed. Then, a tall and slender figure appeared in front of everyone. He was dressed in neat and tidy clothes, and there was a cold aura around him. An indescribable pressure spread out from his body. Little Hachi looked at the sword and subconsciously raised her head. Brother Enchanting. Everyone who saw the person's face was shocked back to their senses. Xu Jing's expression changed drastically. Who are you calling? Chapter 2440. Little Hachi raised her eyes and looked at the young man who was floating in the air. Compared to the past, his expression seemed to be colder, and the pressure from his body was astonishing. He exuded a sense of nobility and alienation that prevented strangers from getting close. She pouted her red lips and spoke in a soft voice filled with grievance. Of course I'm shouting for my Enchanting Gidge. As soon as she finished speaking, the entire illusory god palace fell into a dead silence. All the god envoys were shocked and couldn't believe their ears. Little Hachi's words, Gidge Enchanting Gidge, Gidge Enchanting Gidge. Xu Jing was extremely shocked, and the strong impact made her voice even sharper. What nonsense are you talking about? Is the divine general of the left someone you can casually cling onto? This time, the ones who fell into shock were Little Hachi and the others. She widened her eyes slightly, and there was a hint of confusion in her beautiful eyes. What did you say? Left. Divine general of the left. She looked at Xu Jing, and then looked at the man in the air. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Almost at the same time, Xu Jing's words clearly fell into the ears of Chu Luyue and the others. Buzz. Chu Luyue's mind went blank. She slowly raised her head. The man who was dressed in neat clothes had a handsome face and a cold temperament. His tall and slender body stood there like an unsheathed sword, incomparably sharp. Divine general of the left. Enchanting. She whispered softly. It was just a few simple words, but she spoke them extremely slowly. Every word seemed to go through her mouth 100 times, and she used all her strength to finally say it. In an instant, countless images crazily appeared in her mind. Su Li gasped and covered her red lips with her hand. Her pair of eyes that always contained a gentle smile were now filled with shock and disbelief. She almost subconsciously looked at Chu Luyue. Little you, how could he be? She didn't finish her sentence. Because at this moment, Chu Luyue was staring at Enchanting. There was no expression on her beautiful face. That pair of starry eyes suddenly became so quiet and deep that it was unfathomable. Under the calm, the undercurrent was surging. Su Li's breathing stagnated. Beside them, Sheng Wanjing, Mu Hongyu, and the others were also dumbfounded. Xiao Ran raised his hand and pointed at the man in the air. That's not. Before he finished speaking, he looked at Little Hachi and then at Chu Luyue. An extremely preposterous conjecture surfaced in his mind. How is this possible? Little Hachi finally realized what had happened. She held the medicinal cauldron by her side with one hand and looked up in a daze at the man who had suddenly appeared. At this moment, he suddenly couldn't say anything. It was as if a corner of the truth that had been buried for a long time had suddenly been revealed. Everything was surging like a river, covering the sky and covering the earth. Even the air seemed to be filled with an ancient and distant aura, making people feel as if they had fallen into a dreamland, and it was difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. At this moment, many of the people standing outside the gate of the illusory god palace recognized Enchanting. Wasn't that the man who had accompanied Little Hachi to the Herb Mountain? But how did he become the high and mighty divine general of the left in the blink of an eye? Countless people were shocked. However, perhaps because they were intimidated by that person's pressure, for a moment, no one spoke. Dead silence, frozen. Swish. Enchanting raised his hand, and that long sword suddenly flew back from Little Hachi and fell into his hand again. Little Hachi's gaze also fell on his face. Clearly, they had the same facial features, but for some reason, they suddenly seemed a little unfamiliar. She stared at that face, as if she wanted to find some clues from it. However, Enchanting wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Xu Jing. His gaze was as cold as a knife. Swish. He turned his wrist, and the long sword in his hand suddenly fell, pointing at Xu Jing. The sharp edge of the sword was full of majesty. The life and death juncture is the last stage to screen cultivators before ascending to the heavens and becoming a god. No one is allowed to interfere, cause trouble, or distort the truth. Eighth Oracle, do you know your mistake? A piercingly cold voice instantly spread far and wide between the heavens and the earth. Almost in an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Shu Jing. No one is allowed to interfere, cause trouble, or distort the truth. What did that mean? The divine general of the left was interrogating the eighth oracle. Didn't that mean that the eighth divine envoy had really done something? She really did something during the competition just now. The emperor was in charge of the Pantheon record. Although he didn't interfere with the affairs of the illusory god palace, he had the right to supervise it. The divine general of the left had suddenly appeared, and it was obvious that he was here for this matter. In the life and death juncture, Shu Jing did something shameful. Shu Jing was also dumbfounded. At first, she was full of shock and anger because she heard little Hachi call out, "Brother Yanqing." However, before she could completely react, Yanqing's question instantly caused her to panic. A trace of panic flashed across her eyes. She tried her best to stay calm and said reluctantly, "Divine General of the Left, I don't know what you mean." Yanqing asked coldly, "You don't want to admit it?" Shu Jing's heart trembled, and a huge wave of panic surged from the bottom of her heart. She gritted her teeth. "I don't know, you don't want to admit it." Yanqing interrupted her. His words were firm, and his tone was cold. It was obvious that he had confirmed everything. Everyone looked at each other. The divine general of the left was one of the emperor's men. Now that he suddenly appeared and questioned the eighth oracle in public, he must have been very confident. However, Shu Jing didn't want to admit it. Wasn't she looking for trouble for herself? For a moment, everyone looked at Shu Jing with more complicated expressions. Surprise, contempt, mockery. As the oracle, Shu Jing had always been high and mighty. In particular, she had been in charge of the Herb Mountain for many years and had great power. When people saw her, they would eagerly try to curry favor with her. Who knew that she would have such a day? No one was stupid. They could figure out what was going on with the current situation. She was the culprit behind little Hachi's accident at the last moment. Shu Jing clenched the jade box in her hand. Her delicately manicured nails were almost broken. The sharp pain made her regain some consciousness. She looked up at Yanqing and asked, "Divine General of the Left, are you sure that I deliberately stopped little Hachi from making the elixir just now?" Yanqing didn't say anything, but his expression couldn't be more obvious. Shu Jing suddenly laughed and asked softly, "What are you talking about?" "Then I want to ask, why did I do that? Who is she? Why did I take such a risk?" Yanqing narrowed his eyes. Coldness overflowed from his body, and he suddenly clenched the hilt of his sword. It was her own incompetence that ruined the elixir. "Now, you want to push the blame to me?" She sneered. Did I do something, or did the divine general of the left not want to see her lose so badly? Who knows? Chapter 2441. After the initial shock, Shu Jing had already thought through many things. So the brother Yanqing that little Hachi talked about was the divine general of the left. They didn't have the same name, they were the same person. That day in the reeds of Herb Mountain, the somewhat familiar figure he had seen was indeed him. Because in the illusory god palace, other than the divine envoys, no one else knew what the divine general of the left and right looked like. Therefore, he was even willing to appear at Herb Mountain with little Hachi. She still remembered clearly what she heard that day. Everyone said that the two of them were extremely intimate and were a match made in heaven. They went in and out together, coming and going hand in hand. Even little Hachi rejected Liang He because of him. Thinking of this, Shu Jing couldn't help but sneer and look at Liang He with eyes full of sarcasm. Because of Yanqing's sudden appearance, everyone in the celestial physician competition area had temporarily stopped what they were doing. Fortunately, the pills in the cauldron weren't affected and were all in the corresponding state. Of course, only someone like the divine general of the left could do such a thing. Liang He, you've been sad and dispirited for her for a long time, but you don't know that she has already fallen in love with the divine general of the left. Why would she like you? Liang He's face turned even paler. His eyes wandered between little Hachi and Yanqing a few times. His lips trembled, but in the end, he was speechless. Everyone understood the meaning of Xu Jing's words. Little Hachi failed to refine pills. According to the rules, she should be killed immediately. But at this moment, Yanqing appeared. In everyone's eyes, he and little Hachi were indeed together, and their relationship was extremely good. Although it was a little inappropriate to suspect the divine general of the left, but it wasn't impossible. After all, he did do a lot for little Hachi before. At this moment, a mocking laugh was suddenly heard. Xu Jing looked coldly at little Hachi. How could she still laugh at a time like this? However, in the next moment, little Hachi's words shocked her. Little Hachi lazily leaned against the side of the cauldron. She tilted her head and her red lips curled into a smile. Who told you that my pills were destroyed? Perhaps it was because of her injury, but her voice was a bit hoarser than usual. However, when paired with her languid and soft tone, it was even more enchanting. Xu Jing's mind went blank for a moment. She asked almost uncontrollably, "What did you say?" She clearly didn't hold back in that attack just now. That pill was definitely impossible. As if reading her mind, little Hachi raised her other hand and slowly opened her palm. A pill the size of a longan fruit lay quietly in her palm. Its shape was round and smooth, and its color was bright and rich. The patterns on its surface were especially clear and distinguishable. A strong and fragrant medicinal fragrance spread out from within. It was precisely the azure-glazed scarlet fire pill. Furthermore, anyone could tell that this was a medicinal pill that could be called perfect. This is impossible. The moment she saw the emerald scarlet flame pill, Xu Jing suddenly widened her eyes and screamed. How could this be? Just now, the pill is right here. Why are you saying that it's impossible? Little Hachi snorted. She licked her lips and rubbed her waist. In order to protect this pill, I spent a lot of effort. Xu Jing used almost all the power she could muster in that attack just now. If she hadn't reacted quickly, she would have succeeded. The corners of her lips curled up into a smile as she looked at Xu Jing with a faint smile. Eighth messenger of God, I should have passed this trial of life and death, right? Now, do you still want to kill me on the spot? Silence. The air seemed to have frozen. Everything froze at this moment. Xu Jing only felt a buzzing sound in her head, and her vision turned black. She actually, really managed to protect that pill. Little Hachi laughed and said, although Brother Yanqing has always treated me very well, but, when it comes to matters of life and death, he is extremely fair. To tell you the truth, I only found out about this person's identity today. As she spoke, she raised her eyes slightly and glanced at Yanqing with a faint smile. Who would have thought that Brother Yanqing would be so powerful? Yanqing pursed her thin lips slightly. Eighth messenger of God, you just suspected that Brother Yanqing was unfair and abusing his power for personal gain. However, the pill is clearly fine now. What you said just now. Don't you think it's ridiculous? Little Hachi said slowly. Every word was like a resounding slap to Xu Jing's face. Yes. She just said that Yanqing was worried that little Hachi would die at the critical moment, so he stepped in. But in reality, Lil Eight's pill had already been successfully refined. If that was the case, then what she said just now was clearly slander. Xu Jing was completely flustered. Yanqing looked at Mu Qinghe. First messenger of God, don't you have anything to say now? Hearing this, everyone looked at Mu Qinghe. Finally, he said, it's my fault. I'm willing to let the divine general of the left deal with her. Everyone was in an uproar. That was an admission. The eighth messenger of God, Xu Jing, had indeed deliberately tampered with the pill during the critical moment just now. She wanted to take the opportunity to kill little Hachi. As a messenger of God, she could not be forgiven for doing such a thing. The last trace of blood on Xu Jing's face faded in an instant. Her legs gave way and she almost fell to the ground. First messenger of God. Mu Qinghe's expression did not change. She was completely indifferent. Xu Jing felt like her heart was on fire. She was about to step forward and beg for mercy when she suddenly heard the sound of something breaking through the air. Whoosh! Xu Jing felt all the hair on her body stand on end. A chill rose from the bottom of her feet and instantly surrounded her. She could not break free. The sharp and cold sword aura covered the sky and covered the earth. She looked up in panic and saw that Yan Qing's sword was already heading straight for her. There was no way to avoid it. No, she had just spat out a word when she suddenly felt a chill coming from her lower abdomen. A strong wind blew past her body and the chill penetrated her bones. Crack! She heard the sound of something breaking. She slowly lowered her head. A bloody wound was clearly visible on her lower abdomen. Warm and sweet blood kept flowing out and dyed her skin red. Then, an intense pain spread from the wound to the rest of her body. Her body trembled and she suddenly knelt on the ground. Thump! Her knees hit the ground heavily, making a muffled sound. Blood slowly flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Xu Jing's body stiffened as a huge wave of panic welled up in her. Her pill of essence was broken. She slowly raised her head and looked at Yan Qing. He was suspended in midair, high and mighty. Suddenly, he frowned and walked toward her. There seemed to be a deeply hidden worry in his eyes. Xu Jing's eyebrows twitched. Yen, a gust of wind blew past. He had already passed by her side. Her expression froze. Then, she suddenly realized something and turned around to look. Little Hachi was out of energy. She loosened her grip on the medicine cauldron and her body slid down. A strong arm wrapped around her waist and scooped her up. Chapter 2442. Little Hachi was already seriously injured. She was barely holding on with her willpower. Now that she saw that Xu Jing's pill of essence was broken, she relaxed and could not hold on any longer. Everything went black and she fell down. However, before she could fall to the ground, she felt a tight grip around her waist and was picked up by someone. She forced herself to open her eyes and saw a familiar cold face. She frowned and started to push him away. Let go of me. She did not pay attention to him earlier, but now she came back to her senses. Yan Qing. Divine General of the Left. No wonder he was called Yan Qing. No wonder Xu Jing had such a big reaction when he heard how she addressed him. No wonder he always stayed in that small courtyard and did not go out often. No wonder, there were too many. She did not think so before, but now that she thought about it, there were many suspicious points. However, why would she think of this in the beginning? Little Eighth was extremely enraged, and the nameless fire in his heart burned fiercely. Let go. She pushed Yan Qing hard with both hands. Unfortunately, this little bit of strength was not enough for Yan Qing. Apart from touching a sturdy chest, there was nothing else. Stop it. Yan Qing frowned and carried her out of the competition area. Little Hachi was furious. Stop it. He actually said that she was making a fuss. Please, can you figure out who was the one who lied first and did something wrong? She gasped and raised her voice. Men and women should not touch each other. Don't you know this? Yan Qing stopped in his tracks. However, it was only for a moment, and he continued to walk forward. Little Hachi began to twist crazily in his arms, wanting to jump down. She did not want to see this face at all. Yan Qing frowned slightly. He exerted force with his palm, turned slightly, and held her waist. Suddenly, his whole body stiffened. Little Hachi was wearing a short top and a long pleated skirt. Usually, when she stood, the string of broken jade tassels on the hem of her short jacket barely covered her slender and fair waist. Now that she was being held in Yan Qing's arms, her slender waist was exposed whenever she moved. Yenqing's hand just happened to press on that warm and soft spot. Under his palm, there were a few broken jade beads, a few tassels wrapped around his fingers, and an incredible softness and smoothness. That warmth seemed to spread from the center of his palm. His ears were suddenly dyed with a faint red. For a moment, he didn't know if he should continue or, however, at this moment, little Hachi's body suddenly curled up and let out a low groan. His voice sounded like he was in great pain. Yenqing frowned and looked down. Only then did she see that there was a large bruise on her originally white and eye-catching waist. There were even traces of blood on it. It was truly a ghastly sight. Yenqing almost immediately understood that this injury was caused by her bumping into the medicine cauldron just now. And that time, he had pressed right on her wound. He immediately changed the position of his hand. Little Hachi's aggrieved voice was heard. Yenqing. You're hurting me. Although she was angry, because of her grievance, her voice became extraordinarily soft, and there was a faint hoarseness in her voice. Yenqing's body stiffened. After a moment, he said in a low voice, I won't. His voice was very low, and not many people heard it. But little Hachi heard it. Xu Jing also heard it. Her temples were throbbing, and her heart felt like it was being squeezed by something. Even the pierced wound on her lower abdomen became numb to the pain. I won't. When had the aloof and cold-hearted divine general of the left ever whispered to anyone in such a soft voice? She swallowed a mouthful of blood, and her hands that supported her body gradually tightened, making ear-piercing sounds on the ground. The rough and sharp pain couldn't be reduced in the slightest. She stared at the two of them. Little Hachi didn't seem to appreciate it. She just turned her head, and the corners of her eyes were red. Yenqing carried her in silence and arrived at the house. In front of Chu Luyue. Yenqing finally put little Hachi down. As soon as little Hachi's feet touched the ground, she immediately pounced on Chu Luyue. Master. Chu Luyue supported her and checked her pulse. She frowned slightly. Xu Jing had used a lot of strength, and little Hachi's internal injury was indeed very serious. She took a deep breath, took out a pill, and fed it to little Hachi. Then she poured some of her divine power into little Hachi's Yuan meridian to heal her injury. After a long while, little Hachi's face finally regained some color. But her body was stained with blood, her eyes were red, and there was a large bruise on her waist. She looked really pitiful. She sighed with heartache. Don't do this again. How can that pill be more important than you? Little Hachi's red lips twitched slightly. But I want to come and find Master. If she failed, she would lose face and be killed on the spot. How miserable would that be? So, no matter what, she had to protect this emerald scarlet fire pill. Chu Luyue didn't say anything. She took out another jade bottle. With a flick of her slender fingers, she took out a piece of ointment with a faint green color and applied it on little Hachi's waist. A cool feeling washed over her, instantly relieving the pain. Little Eight hugged one of her arms and leaned his head over, pouting his lips and acting cute. I knew Master was the best to me. Chu Luyue lowered her head and applied the ointment slowly and carefully. The surroundings were silent. Yenqing stood in front of them, holding a sword with one hand. Su Li and the others looked at each other and exchanged glances. Then, they tacitly maintained their silence. A thin layer of sweat gradually appeared on Yenqing's forehead. Finally, Chu Luyue stopped. Hongyu, help little Hachi to rest. Mu Hongyu hurriedly said, Ah. Okay. As she spoke, she had already walked forward to help little Hachi. Before little Hachi could take a step, Chu Luyue said lightly, Wait. Little Hachi, you haven't thanked the divine general of the left. Chapter 24:43. Little Hachi bit her lip and turned around. Who wants to thank him? He's not done with his lies. But when she saw Chu Luyue's calm face, she suddenly remembered something. Wait. If Yen Qing is the divine general of the left, then, who is the Holy Son? Little Hachi's mind went blank. Then, an extremely shocking guess appeared in her mind. Yen Qing has only had one master since the beginning. That means, little Hachi suddenly opened her eyes wide and was dumbfounded. No way. She looked at Chu Luyue, then at Yen Qing, and finally at Chu Luyue. Her heart sank. It seems to be true, Chu Luyue turned his head and raised his eyebrows slightly, as if urging her. Little Hachi grabbed Mu Hongyu's hand and looked at her secretly. Mu Hongyu gave her a look. Don't worry about other things now. It's more important to save your life. Little Hachi's forehead twitched, and she finally stammered. Thank you, Brother Yen Qing. Divine General of the Left, Chu Luyue looked away with satisfaction and said to Yen Qing. Thank you for today's matter. Also, our little Hachi has a willful personality and always speaks her mind. If she offended you before, I hope you don't mind. Yen Qing's Adam's apple moved, and he felt like he was being roasted on fire. That gaze was very light, but for some reason, it felt heavy when it fell on him. He paused and said with difficulty, no. At this moment, there was a commotion outside the door. Following that, two figures appeared one after another. Sorry. I was really delayed by something. I'm not late, right? This voice was very familiar. Chu Luyue looked up. Two familiar faces came into view. The one following behind him was a scoundrel. The man who was one step ahead of him was walking over with a smile on his face. He had an eager expression on his face and was holding an account book in his hand. As if sensing her gaze, the man stopped in his tracks and looked over. Chu Liyue's lips slowly curled into a smile. Second Master Yen. How have you been? The corner of Yen Ji's mouth twitched. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Yen Qing standing in front of Chu Luyue and immediately felt more confident. He waved his hand and forced a smile. Hee, what a coincidence. Chu Luyue scanned him from head to toe. Are you feeling better today? Yen Gu was on the verge of tears. All right. It's all healed. He walked as if he was flying. That's good. Chu Liyue's tone was indifferent. This conversation was extremely strange, causing everyone who heard it to be dumbfounded. Su Li asked curiously. Little you know this second master? Seeing that Ming Shu was following behind him, he must be the second master of Zhenbao Pavilion. But didn't she always say that this second master's health was not good, so she had never seen him before? But this, you can say that. Chu Liyue's words were vague. Su Li and the rest were even more puzzled. It was obvious that they were very familiar with each other, but why did their words sound a little off? Chu Luyue looked at Joy. Lord Joy, if you had told me earlier, I could have reunited with Second Master Yen earlier. If there was more time, we could have sat down and reminisced. Joy's heart skipped a beat. This was not something he could decide. In fact, he had already urged him many times. But if the person above did not agree, how could he dare to do anything? Joy was bitter in his heart. He looked at Yen Gu for help. Yen Gu gave him a kick. Exactly. Why didn't you say so earlier? Joy? Mu Hongyu also looked at Yen Gu in shock. She pointed at him with a trembling finger. Back then, Yen Gu didn't seem to have told him everything. But Yen Gu couldn't care less about this now. He wiped his sweat. Well, if there's nothing else, then I'll go over first. I still have the account books with me. I'll let them use them later. They was, of course, referring to the divine envoys. Chu Luyue laughed. I have no right to ask what Second Master Yen wants to do. Please do as you wish. Yen Ji's heart trembled. Then, he looked at Yen Qing and gave him a look that said, good luck to you. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Luckily, Yan Qing was one step ahead of him. With such a scapegoat, he should be able to die a more dignified death. Thinking of this, Yan Gu coughed. Then I'll leave. As soon as he finished speaking, he had already left. That silhouette inexplicably revealed a sorry figure of someone fleeing in defeat. Ming Shu also hurried to catch up. There seemed to be a strong murderous aura here. The divine general of the left was more powerful. It was better to let him bear it alone. In the blink of an eye, he also hurried to catch up with Yan Gu. Chu Luiyue looked at Yan Qing again and smiled. Why isn't the divine general of the left saying anything? Everyone is still waiting for you. Yan Qing's lips moved. But in the end, he swallowed the rest of his words and turned around. He waved his sword. Xu Jing let out a muffled groan. His body was wrapped by an invisible force and dragged out of the celestial physician competition area. Behind her, there was a long trail of blood. It was a ghastly sight. Because her pearl of essence had been shattered, she had no strength left. She could only collapse on the ground, barely breathing. Seeing this scene, who would have thought that she was still the proud and honorable 8th Divine Envoy 15 minutes ago? But no one pitied her. Her previous actions had clearly crossed everyone's bottom line. So at this moment, everyone only had disgust and ridicule for her. Such a person was indeed not qualified to be the 8th Divine Envoy. Moreover, her pearl of essence had been shattered. She was completely useless now. In a place like the illusory god palace, this was definitely more painful than killing a person directly. Yan Qing's gaze swept across her body without any ripples. Then, he looked at the celestial physician competition area. He raised the tip of his sword. Continue. Xu Jing had already fallen to such a state. The situation in the celestial physician competition area had become a little tricky. However, little Hachi had already succeeded. It could be considered as a benchmark for them. Jian Fengqi looked at Yan Qing a few times. Then, he looked up at the main hall of the illusory god palace and Mu Qinghe, who was standing on the steps. For a moment, his thoughts were churning and his mood was complicated. Yan Qing was the divine general of the left. Compared to him, the fact that Mu Qinghe was the first god's emissary didn't seem as shocking and surprising. Taking a deep breath, he finally focused and continued to refine the pill in front of him. This world was too complicated. It was more important for him to save his own life first. Everything seemed to be back on track. The life and death competition continued. There was silence all around. The atmosphere was very subtle. Chu Luiyue saw that Jian Fengqi was about to finish. He tilted his head and asked in an emotionless voice. Divine General of the Left, where is your master? Digression, around 1 o'clock. Chapter 2444. Yan Qing's body tensed up instantly. He held his breath and felt his throat dry up. That simple sentence was like a knife hanging over his head, ready to fall at any moment. It made him tremble with fear. He was about to speak when he heard Chu Luiyue laugh again. Oh, I almost forgot. He asked me to wait for him at the illusory god palace. Yan Qing swallowed the words in his throat with difficulty. The surrounding air seemed to be particularly cold, almost squeezing his internal organs together, making it difficult for him to breathe. He had never felt that time was so difficult to pass. Then I'll wait. Chu Luiyue tucked his hair behind his back and said casually. Yan Qing gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, his back drenched in sweat. The strange atmosphere here also attracted the attention of many people. Yu Qian and the others looked over, their minds in a mess. The Yan Qing that little Hachi called brother Yan Qing was the divine general of the left? But wasn't there a rumor that he came from the divine ruins world? And he seemed to be following someone else. A strong sense of uneasiness welled up in the hearts of the divine envoys. Jin Yunlai couldn't help but say, what exactly? Cough, cough, sorry for being late. Before she could finish, Yan Gu had already walked over quickly with Joy. He had never been on good terms with these people. In the past, when they met, he didn't give them any face. But now, his attitude was surprisingly good, and he even had a warm smile on his face. He almost couldn't wait to get to where the crowd was and squeezed his way through. "Make way, cough, please make way." Fan Yunxiao's brows were tightly knitted together. "Second master, why are you squeezing? Isn't there space all around us?" Yan Gu looked at him with resentment. "What do you know? Why don't I find a place to hide first? What if I get splashed with blood later? It's easy for you to say that. I'm happy to. It's none of your business." Fan Yunxiao, she had thought that Yan Ji's temper would improve after not seeing him for so long, but he was still as bad as before. Furthermore, he seemed to be even more arrogant than before. Of course, Fan Yunxiao did not know that a person would not be in a good mood when faced with a life and death situation. Seeing Yan Gu like this, Fan Yunxiao was very annoyed, but she couldn't flare up. After all, the other party had the account book in his hand, and his identity was not to be trifled with. He fiercely waved his sleeves, but could only give up. After being interrupted by Yan Gu, the rest of the divine envoys were also distracted. Although he had doubts in his heart, he couldn't ask too many questions in this situation. Time passed extremely slowly. Finally, the pill in Jian Fengqi's medicine cauldron was finished. Whoosh! The pill shot up into the sky. Jian Fengqi's figure moved, and he leaped up as he effortlessly kept the pill. Click! The pill was placed into a jade box. He landed lightly on the ground and weighed the jade box in his hand. A smile appeared on his handsome face. "It's finally done." Seeing this, Mu Hongyu patted her chest lightly and heaved a sigh of relief. Little Hachi glanced at her and pursed her red lips. "Little Hongyu, why are you so nervous? With the divine general of the left here, can he really die in a life or death situation?" Mu Hongyu, she sneaked a glance at Yan Qing. His face was expressionless as usual. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the aura around Yan Qing seemed to have become colder, that. "Little Hachi, isn't it inappropriate to say this?" Mu Hongyu said with some hesitation. "It's inappropriate." Chu Luiyue suddenly added, his eyes indifferent. The divine general of the left has always been fair and upright. How could he be so biased? Yan Qing's eyelids twitched. Mu Hongyu's eyes darted, and she inexplicably touched her fingers with a guilty conscience. She seemed to have said something wrong. Chu Luiyue suddenly glanced sideways at Yan Gu from afar. Seeing that he had tried his best to hide his plump body behind the oracles, she narrowed her eyes slightly. Then, she suddenly raised the corner of her lips. "Second Master Yan's health does seem to have improved a lot. Don't you think so, Divine General of the Left?" Yan Qing clenched his teeth and finally managed to squeeze out a few words. "His body has always been very healthy." Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows. "Oh, is that so?" In the distance, Yan Gu, who had been listening attentively, almost jumped on the spot when he heard this. "This kid. What nonsense is he talking about? Don't drag others down with you." Zhao glanced at him and advised in a low voice. "Second Master, I think you should lie down." What was there to think about at this point? Yan Gu took a deep breath and regretted it. He came too early. "Mr. Su." Chu Luiyue suddenly looked at Suli. Suli was stunned. "What's wrong?" Chu Luiyue smiled slightly. "Nothing. I just suddenly remembered that you haven't seen Senior Tang Ku for a long time, right?" Oh, this, yes." Suli nodded blankly. "Is there a problem?" "Not really. It's just that. I think he came with Divine General of the Left." Chu Luiyue said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, Tang Ku, who had just arrived at the gate of the palace of the illusory god, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He began to seriously consider whether to continue going in or turn around and leave. Before he could make a decision, he heard Yan Qing's cold and emotionless voice from inside. "He's here. He's just outside." "Tang Ku." Chu Luiyue seemed to have sensed something and looked over. Tang Ku smiled awkwardly. Chu Luiyue said, Tang Ku is the person Mr. Su wants to see. The person I'm waiting for is not here yet. Chapter 2445. Murderous intent overflowed. Su Li glanced at Tang Ku silently. Little Hachi rubbed her waist, thinking about how to run away more conveniently later. Shangguan Jing took a deep breath and covered his face. The divine general of the left. Lord Yenqing, his desire to live is really strong. Xiao Ran was confused. What's wrong? What's wrong? The atmosphere suddenly became very dangerous. On the other side, Tang Ku braced himself and walked in. When Wan Jianfeng saw him, his expression changed slightly. Lord Tang Ku, long time no see. How have you been? Tang Ku's eyes twitched, and he wanted to shut Wan Jianfeng's mouth immediately. What are you shouting for? Are you familiar with me? A stiff smile appeared at the corner of his mouth with difficulty. Good, good. After that, he quickly left. Wan Jianfeng looked back strangely. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but why did he feel that Tang Ku's expression was not right? However, this thought just flashed through his mind. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze, he suddenly froze. Tang Ku didn't go to the side of the divine emissaries, but went to the other side? I'm late. While Tang Ku was speaking insincerely, she came to Su Li under the scrutiny of several people. He took out a palm-sized jade box and handed it over. Lizi, this is a gift for you. Su Li didn't take it, but looked at him strangely, and then looked at Yenqing. At this time, if she still couldn't figure out what was going on, she would have lived for so many years in vain. Lord Tang Ku, why are you so polite? She said. Tang Ku's eyebrows twitched, and he cursed Wan Jianfeng again in his heart. He was under a lot of pressure now. One from Su Li, the other from Chu Luiyue. Mr. Su, this is also Tang Ku Daren's goodwill. You should accept it. Chu Luiyue said gently. Su Li snorted, but still didn't move. Lord Tang Ku is very familiar with the fifth divine emissary. No wonder he was not in a hurry to enter the palace of the illusory god. Tang Ku licked her lips, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Chu Luiyue asked Yenqing softly, as if they were chatting. I wonder what Senior Tang Ku's identity is? Please tell us in detail so that we won't offend you again. Instead of asking Tang Ku, she asked Yenqing. Tang Ku turned to Yenqing for help. Make your words more beautiful. The #1 refiner of the illusory god palace. Yenqing spat out a few words expressionlessly. Tang Ku. I knew I shouldn't have counted on you. Oh, Chu Luiyue said with understanding. The last syllable was slightly drawn out as he smiled thoughtfully. No wonder. Senior Tang Ku's strength was extraordinary. Indeed, it was not something a mortal could compare to. Tang Ku coughed. It's nothing. I just occasionally repair some miscellaneous items. Chu Luiyue suddenly thought of something as she stared at Tang Ku, and her gaze stopped on him for a long time. Tang Ku felt goosebumps all over her body. She was still holding the jade box in her hand and felt very awkward. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? Chu Luiyue looked at Su Li and asked. Mr. Su, you said that Senior Tang Ku set the location of the duel at the Peach Blossom Dock. She was talking about the duel between the two 10,000 years ago. Su Li was startled and nodded. Yes. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. That duel was of great significance to the Peach Blossom Dock. It almost reshaped the cultivation environment of the Peach Blossom Dock. And it was also at that time that the armillary shield suddenly appeared and helped the two of them make the 10 sacred artifacts. Chu Luiyue's gaze swept across Tang Ku's face, and something seemed to flash across her mind. But when she wanted to grab it, it disappeared. Tang Ku's throat was dry and she forced a smile. Su Li said. Since Lord Tang Ku is so honorable, you should go and stay with the divine envoys. Tang Ku was speechless. He felt very conflicted. On one hand, he wanted to escape from this Azura field and save his life. On the other hand, he knew that if he really left, it would not be so easy to stand in front of Su Li again. After thinking about it, he finally gritted his teeth and said, "No, no need. I'm fine with staying here." Yan Gu saw this scene from afar and clicked his tongue. "Look, this is what happens when you lose your freedom. Isn't it better to be alone? At least at this critical moment, you have a chance to breathe." Seeing Yan Ji's unconcealable pride and joy, Ming Shu rubbed his face hard. Second Master seemed to have forgotten that there was still that person above them. Which one of them could escape? Jian Fengqi walked out of the competition area and headed here. Suddenly, his footsteps paused, and a trace of astonishment appeared on his handsome face. "Huh? Why is everyone here all of a sudden?" Yan Qing aside, the divine general of the left had to come. Why was Tang Ku here too? He was focused on refining pills and did not notice the situation outside, so he was still in a daze. Mu Hongyu grabbed his wrist and pulled him over. Jian Fengqi looked down and glanced at the fair and soft hand that was grabbing him tightly. He raised his eyebrows and could not help but smile. He leaned over, lowered his voice, and asked with a smile, "Hongyu, are you so worried about me?" She still said that she did not care about him. Look at how tightly she held onto him after surviving a life-and-death situation. Would she be like this if she did not care about him? Mu Hongyu looked at him as if he was an idiot and said faintly, "Isn't that so? It was not easy to survive a life-and-death situation. Wouldn't it be a pity if he died somewhere else?" Before Jian Fengqi could feel happy, he heard her say again, "Stop talking." Jian Fengqi vaguely felt that something was wrong. But when he saw Mu Hongyu's serious face, he opened his folding fan and whispered into her ear, "Okay. I'll do whatever you say." Mu Hongyu's ears heated up and felt a little ticklish. She subconsciously rubbed her ears and glared at him. Why was he still thinking about this at a time like this? Jian Fengqi was dazzled by her bright almond-shaped eyes. His last bit of intelligence and rationality flew away. It was not that there were no benefits to surviving a life-and-death situation. Look, someone's attitude changed so obviously. Feeling Jian Fengqi's reaction, Mu Hongyu held her forehead helplessly. It was hopeless. Time passed slowly. The competitions in the 4 competition zones were also proceeding in an orderly manner. Perhaps because of the commotion earlier, the Celestial Physician competition ended first. Except for Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi, only 2 other people successfully passed the competition. As for the rest, including Liang He, they all failed. Almost immediately after the competition ended, these people were surrounded by several streams of light that flew out from the competition area. Their souls were destroyed. Chapter 2446. Looking at this scene, Chu Luo suddenly said, "This life-and-death juncture is really dangerous. Doesn't the Imperial Emperor feel that it's a pity to lose so many experts every time?" Her voice was very soft, but Yan Qing heard it clearly. He paused for a moment and explained, "This is the Divine Palace's trial. This is the trial of the illusory God Palace. If there are no accidents, the Emperor will not interfere." The reason why he advanced in advance this time was because Xu Jing had secretly tampered with it and destroyed the fairness of the life-and-death juncture. But in fact, these things were mainly the responsibility of the Divine Palace. Chu Luo narrowed her eyes and then smiled. "I see. It seems that I really don't know much about the Imperial Emperor." Yan Qing, in fact, he wanted to explain a little, but this was really not the right time. Moreover, he had always been a man of few words and was not used to doing such things. If it were Umo, it would be better. If his master could come in person, it would be best. Of course, this was very rare. Therefore, Yan Qing chose to remain silent again. The remaining 3 competition areas were gradually coming to an end. Just as expected, there were very few who succeeded. Chu Luiyue looked forward calmly, but there seemed to be waves in her eyes. Countless images appeared in her mind one after another. Yao Qin. Tianling. Divine Ruins World. North and south of the sea, past and future. It turned out that everything was under his control. In the past, she had always felt that meeting Rong Xiao was the greatest blessing in her life. However, now she realized that it was not a coincidence that they met. Everything that happened after that should have been carried out according to his plan, right? Chu Luiyue pursed her lips slightly. She had long known that this man's thoughts were extremely deep, but she had never thought that he was the one who had spent the most effort on her. He was the Imperial Emperor, so why did he have to do this for her? Chu Luiyue couldn't understand. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the main hall of the Divine Palace. On the steps, Mu Qinghe stood with his hands behind his back. His expression was as indifferent and cold as ever. Did he know about this? She didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered what Xiao Ran had said before. He said that there were a total of 13 divine envoys in the Divine Palace. Senior Xiao Ran. Chu Luiyue looked at Xiao Ran. There's something I want to ask. This sentence instantly broke the silence. The silence. Everyone in the surroundings unconsciously looked over. Xiao Ran immediately said, Chu Luiyue paused, and her voice was calm. Why are there 13 divine envoys in the Divine Palace? Xiao Ran was stunned for a moment before he answered subconsciously. This is naturally because there were 13 envoys in the past. Inside the room, Lu Feng was standing in front of a huge sand table, carrying out the final touches on a few of them. Beside her Chao. For 3 days, Yen and Yu and the time. Luiyue Yu, time. Because he hadn't been able to rest, Lu Feng's eyes were bloodshot. Fortunately, his mind was always focused, and his movements were still very precise. Suddenly, he paused and looked at one of the mountains with a slight frown. How high should this be? Cini reported a number. Lu Feng immediately began to repair the small mountain, trying his best to make it perfect. After tidying it up and confirming that it was correct, he heaved a sigh of relief. This sand table was very particular. There couldn't be the slightest mistake. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look up at Cini. He had built this sand table according to the map his big brother had given him, so he knew that his big brother was very familiar with everything on it. But after 3 days, he was still deeply shocked. Big brother's understanding of these things could no longer be explained by the word familiar. Every mountain, every river, every house, every tile, there was nothing he didn't know. Even if he had personally measured it with his feet, it would be difficult for him to do this, right? But big brother, Lu Feng didn't dare to ask any more questions and continued to work. In fact, he also had huge questions about himself. Because, building this sand table seemed to be getting easier and easier for him. When he first saw the map his big brother had provided and asked him to build it within 3 days, although he agreed quickly, he refused in his heart. After all, he was very clear about his own strength. But, things seemed to be gradually developing in an unexpected direction. Many times, he didn't even need to recall the map to be able to perfect the sand table bit by bit. Furthermore, his movements were skilled. It didn't seem like it was his first time at all. It was as if he naturally knew where the water should flow, where the mountains should gather, and where they should spread. Thus, he swallowed all his questions back into his stomach. Lu Feng retracted his gaze and finished the last part of the repairs. Finally, he let out a long breath. Big brother, it's done. How about you take a look? Cini nodded. Very good. He had been guarding here the entire time and knew every bit of the sand table very well. He didn't need to look anymore to know that there was no problem. Only then did Lu Feng relax and chuckle. It was rare to hear his big brother praise him. Step back. Cini suddenly said. Oh, okay. Lu Feng didn't understand what was going on, but he still obediently took 2 steps back. Then, he saw Tsun Yi make his move. A pale green stream of light flew out from his palm and landed lightly on a certain spot on the sand table. At the same time, a huge barrier silently appeared on Herb Mountain. Chapter 2447. In the Palace of the Illusory God. Xu Jing suddenly sensed something. She raised her head and looked in the direction of Herb Mountain. This is, panic flashed through her heart. She immediately struggled to get up. However, her pearl of essence had been shattered. She was severely injured and had no strength left. It was difficult for her to do something as simple as standing up on her own. Even the wound on her lower abdomen was torn open again because of this. Intense pain surged through her body. She bit her lips tightly and forced herself to swallow the taste of blood that filled her mouth. Th. She turned around and looked at Mu Qinghe as she said weakly, "I'm sorry." Now, it was obvious that she couldn't do anything with her own strength. She had to find someone else. The first oracle, Mu Qinghe, was her best choice right now. Sensing the commotion, many people in the palace of the illusory god looked over with different expressions. First oracle. I have, Xu Jing spoke very slowly. Yan Qing had not held back at all in that strike. It had completely shattered her pearl of origin and even left behind an extremely serious injury on her body. So now, she was hanging on by her last breath. What does she want to do now? Little Hachi narrowed her eyes when she saw this scene from the corner of her eye. Is she asking the first oracle for help? She and Xu Jing didn't get along well. Coupled with the previous incident, she hated Xu Jing even more now. Therefore, when she saw Xu Jing speak, she subconsciously thought that she was up to something again. Mu Hongyu glanced at her and said, "I don't think so." If Mu, first oracle, wanted to help her, she would have done it earlier. Why would she wait until now? Since Mu Qinghe had said in public that she would leave everything to Yan Qing, she shouldn't interfere anymore. Otherwise, wouldn't she be slapping herself in the face? Moreover, Xu Jing was not only useless now, but she had also become a stain on the palace of the illusory god. Mu Qinghe and the others didn't even have time to draw a line with her, let alone help her. Little Eight nodded in agreement, seemingly deep in thought. Then what is she trying to do? Mu Qinghe also looked at Xu Jing. His eyes were as cold as ever, without a trace of emotion. He looked at Xu Jing as if he was looking at an object that had nothing to do with him. Herb Mountain, Xu Jing spat out these 2 words with difficulty. He dragged his crippled body forward slowly. The ground beneath her was already stained with a large patch of blood. It was a ghastly sight. Mu Qinghe frowned slightly. Right at this moment, Yan Qing suddenly attacked. Qi! A long sword pierced through the air. The terrifying sword energy instantly enveloped Xu Jing. In the next moment, the sword pierced through Xu Jing's calf and nailed her to the ground. She cried out in pain and almost fainted. Yan Qing's voice was cold. Who allowed you to leave? There was dead silence all around. Many people looked at each other. This, strictly speaking, Xu Jing didn't leave, right? All she did was move a little bit. However, since Yan Qing said so, the others naturally couldn't refute. Some people couldn't stand it anymore and couldn't help but look at Mu Qinghe. However, he didn't move or say anything. It seemed that he was indifferent. Fan Yinshao frowned and finally said in a low voice, Xu Jing has been the 8th divine envoy for so many years. She looked after the herb mountain and refined pills. Even if she didn't get any credit, she still worked hard. The first divine envoy is so indifferent. It's really. Yu Qian's expression was a little cold. Yinshao, be careful with your words. She has made a big mistake. She was indeed too bold to do anything at the critical moment of life and death. What's more, she did this just to take the opportunity to take revenge on little Hachi. She was simply brainless. Fan Yinshao moved her mouth. If it weren't for the divine general of the left and little Hachi, before she could finish speaking, she was met with Yu Qian's warning eyes. She finally swallowed the rest of her words. The rest of the people looked at each other. In fact, Xu Jing wasn't so impulsive and brainless in the past. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the 8th divine envoy for so many years. The key was that she had some feelings for the divine general of the left. How could she withstand these provocations? No wonder she lost control for a moment and did so many stupid things. Yu Qian glanced at Xu Jing. She's still thinking about the herb mountain at this time. She doesn't know that from now on, all of this has nothing to do with her. Now, he only hoped that Xu Jing's matter wouldn't implicate the palace of the illusory god in them. Fan Yinshao heard this and could only sigh helplessly. When Xu Jing heard this, she felt the blood in her chest and abdomen surging. She wanted to talk about the barrier of the herb mountain. But these people, pfft. Xu Jing finally spat out a mouthful of blood, fell to the ground, and fainted. Actually, Yu Qian and the others couldn't be blamed for this matter. They were so indifferent because on one hand, Xu Jing had done something wrong and couldn't be saved. On the other hand, she had been too obsessed with controlling the herb mountain all these years. When people heard her mention the herb mountain, they subconsciously thought that she still had other thoughts about it. There were many reasons that led to this situation. In the end, she could only blame herself. Chu Liuyue's gaze lingered on Xu Jing for a long time. She seemed to be looking at her, but also seemed to be thinking about something. Little Hachi saw her like this and pursed her red lips slightly. She reached out to take her hand. "Master, why are you always looking at her?" What was there to look at when she was already sentenced to death? Chu Luyue came back to her senses and tilted her head to look at little Hachi. Her eyes were pitch black and calm, but there seemed to be an unfathomable undercurrent in the depths of her eyes. Little Hachi suddenly froze and touched her face. "Master, why are you looking at me like that?" Was there something on her face? Chu Luyue shook her head. "Nothing. I just suddenly remembered that in the life and death situation just now, your performance was excellent. You even beat Xu Jing by a bit." Adie's beautiful eyes blinked lightly as a wisp of a charming and complacent smile appeared on her face. "Of course. I'm Master's woman. Of course I'm better than her." Chu Luyue seemed to have thought of something as her lips curved up. In the room, Cin Yi was still moving. Lu Feng stood to the side, holding her breath and concentrating. After the faint green light appeared, it began to drift in all directions with Cin Yi's movements. Silently, it covered all the mountains and clear streams on the sand table. Chapter 2448. Time passed slowly. After saying those words to little Hachi, Chu Luyue did not speak again. She just looked ahead quietly. After the celestial physician competition ended, the martial artist competition also came to an end. Compared to the other competition areas, the number of people here was the highest. But the competition was still very fierce. About 100 venerables challenged Mu Dongyu one by one, but only 8 people successfully passed. After it was over, Mu Dongyu turned around and left the competition area. The 8 venerables also walked out one after another. They were more or less injured and looked miserable. But compared to those who had died in the life and death juncture, they were obviously very good. Seeing this scene, Xiao Ran's eyes turned slightly. He glanced at Chu Luyue and could not help but shake his head. Sigh, what a pity, her subordinates were all very promising. Such a good opportunity, but they missed it just like that. Chu Luyue, of course, heard what he said. However, she did not seem to care very much about it. She just frowned slightly and smiled slightly. Seeing this, Xiao Ran had already guessed her attitude, so he swallowed the rest of his words. Compared to other things, she probably cared more about the lives of her subordinates. It was great to be able to ascend to the heavens and become a venerables, but they also needed to have the strength and luck. Besides, many people around her, including herself, had already entered the final round. Thinking of this, Xiao Ran stopped thinking and did not say anything more. The Tianlei in the chaos holy jade was quickly consumed. Several craftsmen were focused on forging divine artifacts, crazily snatching the power of the Tianlei. Unfortunately, until the end, no one could successfully forge a divine artifact. Only 2 of the blacksmiths managed to win the competition with their outstanding venerable artifact and obtained the qualification in the end. The number of craftsmen is indeed the lowest. Su Li murmured softly. This was the type of cultivation that had the highest requirement for talent. Mu Hongyu asked curiously. Mr. Su, if the Tianlei was still open as usual, would the situation be better? Su Li shook her head. Although it will have some impact, the first divine messenger has already sent enough power of Tianlei into the holy chaos jade. So, overall, it will not affect the craftsmen during the life and death juncture. Mu Hongyu nodded in understanding. I see. I thought that since they were so close to the chaotic holy jade, they might be able to increase the possibility of refining a saint artifact. Xiao Ran laughed. That's difficult. Now that the chaotic holy jade was incomplete, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through to become a crafting saint. Without that talent, it's impossible to do it even if you stand inside the primal chaos holy jade. Mu Hongyu asked subconsciously, what if the holy jade of chaos returns to its original state? Wouldn't it be easier? Logically speaking, yes, but how could it be that easy? Xiao Ran clicked his tongue. The holy primal chaos jade has been missing for tens of thousands of years. For many years, the illusory god palace has been looking for the missing piece in the middle, but there has been no news. Probably, there was still no chance. Hearing this, Mu Hongyu was stunned for a moment, and unconsciously looked at Chu Luiyue. The surrounding people also became more and more quiet. They had all seen Chu Luiyue's globe shield. Without a doubt, that was the missing piece of the holy jade of chaos. It was just that. For some reason, Chu Luiyue had been in the illusory god palace for so long, but there was still no sign of the globe shield being returned. Su Li frowned slightly. She still remembered the scene in the Red Moon Desert clearly. As soon as Chu Luiyue stepped into the illusory god palace, a tyrannical force suddenly erupted from the holy jade of chaos, trying to snatch her globe shield. But now, when she really came to the illusory god palace, nothing happened. Suddenly, Chu Luiyue seemed to feel something and looked in a certain direction. Phoenix Mountain. Clusters of red and gold flames burned silently on the mountain. Dumpling sat cross-legged with her eyes closed. Those flames contained astonishing power and constantly surged toward her body. And the aura on her body was also constantly rising. In front of her, the 2 Tian baby had already grown 8 leaves and was gently swaying in the wind. Dumpling's cute little face was now suffused with a thin layer of red. Dull pain came from all over her body. Beads of sweat kept appearing on her forehead, but they were quickly burned away. She had a strong premonition in her heart, the 8th meridian should be opening soon. Finally, the last person in the Mystic Master competition also stopped. Jin Yunlai let out a long breath. Even though he was the 7th divine envoy, it was still very tiring to test so many people at once. Unexpectedly, the number of Mystic Masters who passed the life and death trial was higher than expected. There were a total of 6 people. Yu Qian frowned slightly and looked at Fan Yinxiao. Didn't you say that there would be about 3 people who would pass smoothly? Why are there suddenly 3 more now? 3 people didn't sound like a lot, but it was actually very significant. This was the number of Mystic Masters who passed the life and death trial, and it was twice as many as expected. Fan Yinxiao's expression wasn't very good either. Isn't it simple? Before this, there were 3 people who successfully completed the Star Road and comprehended all the mystic formations on it. Yen Gu suddenly sneered from the side. These people have spent a lot of effort on the Xian formations in the Heaven Scroll some time ago. Why, you don't know this? Chapter 2449. His words made the faces of Yu Qian and the others even gloomier. To a certain extent, Yan Gu knew more about these matters than them. As divine envoys, this made them feel rather embarrassed. Fan Yinshao laughed coldly. Second Master Yen is in charge of Zhenbao Pavilion and is very well informed. Who has a few trump cards in their hands and who has made progress? Everything is under your control. We, naturally, can't be compared to you. Yan Gu let out a heh and said humbly, you flatter me. I'm not as powerful as the third divine envoy says. Besides, it's very tiring to check the accounts every day. How can I compare to the third divine envoy? Other than the year of opening the gate of heaven, you've been very carefree. Fan Yinxiao's face turned slightly green, and the veins on her forehead throbbed. This Yan Gu, he's really too much. Isn't he just relying on, if Second Master Yen feels tired, you can assign these tasks to others? Fan Yinxiao took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart. For example, that account book. Yan Gu blinked. Account book? You mean the one that the first master asked us to manage? Fan Yinxiao choked and swallowed the rest of her words. That's right. The precious treasure pavilion belonged to that person. On the surface, it was a business, but in reality, it was just one of the methods that person used to supervise the illusory god palace. Even though they were divine envoys, they had no right to interfere. Yan Gu had already said this. How could he continue? Fan Yinxiao clenched her fists and looked elsewhere. Out of sight, out of mind. At this moment, a melodious sound of a bell came from above. Dong! This sound of the bell carried a shocking pressure and spread across the sky above the illusory god palace. Everyone's heart trembled as they looked in the direction of the sound of the bell. The person who had rung the bell was Mu Qinghe. Following the sound of the bell was his cold and indifferent voice. Those who have passed the life and death stage, enter the palace. Enter the palace. Naturally, the main palace of the illusory god palace. Upon hearing this, Chu Luyue narrowed his eyes. Following this, the tightly shut door behind Mu Qinghe finally opened. Bang! In an instant, an invisible, vast pressure gushed out from the main palace like a river. Chu Luyue's heart trembled. Almost at the same time, the 3 water droplets that had been silent for a long time in his dantian began to fluctuate violently. An indescribably strong summoning force came from within, echoing from afar. Her heart began to beat rapidly, and even the blood in her body seemed to be boiling. As the second divine emissary, Yu Qian took the lead and walked up the stairs towards the main palace. Following closely behind were several other oracles. When they all went up, the ones who followed closely behind were Jun Zhoqing and Nan Jinshu. Seeing this scene, many people were shocked. Chu Luyue narrowed his eyes. She knew that Jun Zhoqing and Nan Jinshu were not ordinary people, but she did not expect them to be ranked so high. As if sensing her gaze, Jun Zhoqing, who had just stepped onto the stairs, suddenly turned around and glanced at her. That glance was unfathomable and unpredictable. Before Chu Luyue could figure it out, Jun Zhoqing had already turned around and stepped into the main palace. Su Li said, "Little Yu, let's go too." Chu Luyue did not move, but looked at Yan Qing instead. Left Divine General, why don't you go ahead first? No expression could be seen on Yan Qing's handsome and cold face. The Emperor is about to arrive. We will wait here. Digression, Khan, just a little bit less today. This side was not easy to see. She had imagined many scenarios, but as for which one, she would only know at the moment when she wrote it. Ahem. But soon. Very soon. Chapter 2450. Chu Luyue blinked, and her lips seemed to curl up into a faint smile. Okay. With that, she turned and left without hesitation, heading toward the main hall of the illusory god palace. Su Li and the others followed behind her. Little Hachi glanced at Yan Qing from head to toe. Yan Qing seemed to sense it and looked over. No emotion could be seen on his handsome face. Little Hachi snorted. Looks like I can't call him Brother Enchanting anymore. What if I offend the divine general of the left? Enchanting's heart skipped a beat. However, before he could say anything, Lil 8 had already taken a step forward and walked forward. Master, seventh brother. Wait for me. As she spoke, she clutched her injured waist and followed him with small steps. Her steps were hurried, and her long pleated skirt fluttered in the wind. Occasionally, there would be the crisp sound of broken jade beads colliding with each other. Chihan slowed down and turned his head to ask in a low voice, "Is your injury serious?" "Yes." Little Hachi came to his side. She tilted her waist and lifted up the broken jade beads. A corner of the bruise on her slender waist could be seen clearly. Although he had used medicine, it was still a ghastly sight. Chihan frowned and helplessly pulled her hand to put down the broken jade beads. "How can you do this in public?" Little Hachi snorted. She was carefree and didn't care much about these things. On the other hand, the other members of the 13U army would correct her every time they met her. Little Hachi held Chihan's arm. "Seventh brother, let me lean on you for a while." Every step she took hurt badly. Chihan was about to ask why she didn't let Mu Hongyu continue to help when he saw Jian Fengqi standing beside Mu Hongyu. Looking at his posture, he really didn't intend to let her go. Chihan, he stretched out his arm to support Little 8, and they walked forward just like that. Suddenly, he felt a cold gaze sweep over him from behind. He instinctively turned around and met Enchanting's gaze. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Enchanting was the first to withdraw her gaze. Chihan pretended that nothing had happened. He narrowed his eyes slightly and led Little Hachi forward. After a while, their voices could be heard in low voices. "Don't be so close to anyone in the future. Otherwise, you'll be deceived and won't even know it." Little Hachi pouted. "Got it. You and the left divine general, Aya, it's fake." Fifth brother and the others misunderstood. Little Hachi stomped her feet. "I wanted to tell you guys for a long time, but I never had the chance. Do you understand now?" However, he had never imagined that it would be in such a manner. Enchanting's eyelids drooped slightly, and her jaw tensed slightly. Chu Luiyue stepped onto the stairs. Step by step, she walked steadily. Even though she had seen an illusion in the Red Moon Desert and entered it before. However, a fake was a fake after all. At this moment, stepping on the stairs felt heavy and real. This was the real Illusory God Palace. She stepped onto the last step and took a deep breath. Then, she raised her eyes and looked ahead. The door of the main palace was wide open. It was majestic and sacred. The 3 water droplets in her dantian were fluctuating wildly at this moment. Her expression was calm as she forcibly suppressed this movement. Then, she turned her gaze slightly and looked at Mu Qinghe beside her. Actually, this was the first time she looked at him seriously after so long. Previously, in the illusory god sea, the seawater was surging and the light was dim, so she couldn't see clearly. Moreover, she was deeply shocked at that time and didn't have time to care about anything else. Now that she saw him again, she had calmed down. The sun was just right now, and his appearance was clearly reflected in her eyes. His facial features were exactly the same as before, but his temperament had changed a lot. Even looking at him made people feel that he was very different from before. It even seemed like there were 2 people. In the end, he was the first divine envoy, Chu Luiyue silently said in her heart. Mu Qinghe's eyes were indifferent, without any ripples. The two's eyes met for a moment. Chu Luiyue smiled, turned around, and stepped into the main palace. The main palace of the illusory god palace was actually the same as what she had seen in the Red Moon Desert. The circular cylindrical palace was tall and majestic. There were grooves all around, each of which had light balls of different colors and sizes. Looking up, there was a brilliant dome. Vast pressure surged from all directions, entangling and swallowing people. Yu Qian and the others who had come in before were now standing side by side in the innermost position of the main palace. Chu Luiyue randomly chose a place to stand. Compared to the other cultivators who had come in with great difficulty, her appearance was too plain. Su Li looked around and frowned slightly. It was exactly the same as what she had seen in the Red Moon Desert. Actually, those who had been to the Red Moon Desert and entered the illusion would definitely be as shocked as Su Li when they came here. However, other than them, no one else had successfully entered this place, so this matter didn't cause too much of a reaction. Most of the cultivators were surprised and amazed, mainly because this was the main palace of the illusory god palace, the holy land that they had yearned for so long and finally arrived at. After everyone had entered, Mu Qinghe finally walked in as well. When the divine emissaries saw her, they all bowed respectfully. Chu Luiyue also looked over. At this moment, Mu Qinghe came to the center of the main palace. She cupped her fists. First divine emissary Mu Qinghe, please appear. Everyone quieted down and looked at her nervously and excitedly. Is the divine master going to appear? One had to know that the divine master didn't usually appear. It was extremely difficult for even the divine emissaries in the illusory god palace to meet him. Now, on the eve of many cultivators ascending to the heavens and becoming gods, he was finally going to appear. How could everyone not be excited and curious? Everyone's eyes were focused on the position in front of Mu Qinghe. After a moment, a silver and red light slowly appeared in front of everyone. The starry light was so dazzling that it was almost impossible to look at it directly. Seeing this scene, Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes slightly. Shangguan Jing held his breath and turned to look at Chu Luiyue. Her god domain was also silver red in color. If it was a coincidence, it was too unbelievable. However, Chu Luiyue's face was still calm, as if she wasn't surprised. Shangguan Jing retracted his gaze and looked again. At this moment, a black figure was faintly discernible in the ball of light. The moment this figure appeared, an incomparably powerful pressure descended at the same time. Other than the divine emissaries, the remaining cultivators' expressions changed. The divine master's power was indeed extraordinary. Just this point alone was enough to make everyone present look up to him. However, compared to the past, there were some differences. His entire body was suffused with an oppressive coldness, a dense aura of slaughter, and a pair of piercingly cold and indifferent phoenix eyes. High and mighty, unapproachable. Chu Luiyue stared blankly. He was once the person she was most familiar with, but now, he was also the person she was most unfamiliar with. Mu Qinghe and the others put their hands on the left side of their chests and saluted respectfully. Greetings, Emperor. Their voices were uniform and filled with deep respect. When everyone heard this, they finally came back to their senses and saluted one after another. Greetings, Emperor. Everyone bowed their heads and saluted. Only Chu Luiyue remained motionless. She looked at him. It was clearly an extremely close distance, but it was as if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, far and untouchable. Rongxiu. That was her pillow. He was also the most honorable emperor who had inherited the fate of the heavenly Tao and controlled all the gods in the world. Chapter 2452. She looked at him, her gaze sweeping over his face. His eyebrows were high, his nose was straight, and his thin scarlet lips were slightly pursed. That was the face that she was most familiar with, which was engraved in her heart. However, his eyes were cold, noble, and murderous. They were as cold and distant as a glacier that would never melt. That was a completely different look from what she remembered. Chu Luiyue blinked gently and curled her hands that were hanging by her side. Clearly, not long ago, this man had held her in his arms and kissed her between her eyebrows and the corner of her lips. He was full of affection. Now, he was facing her from afar, as if they had just met for the first time. For a moment, she was in a trance and did not know what was real and what was not. At this moment, Rongxiu's gaze fell on her. She saw the color of his eyes clearly. Suddenly, she frowned slightly. She seemed to have seen Rongxiu somewhere before. A blurry image suddenly flashed across her mind. Chu Liuyue's pupils contracted. That's right. Peach Blossom Dock. The mirror hidden in the Tao Gate world had once reflected his appearance. At that time, she only felt that the reflection of Rongxiu in the mirror was a little different from him. At that time, he was clearly wearing a snow-white robe, but the person in the mirror was wearing a black robe. His expression was cold and murderous, which was poles apart from his usual gentle and elegant appearance. Unfortunately, she only took a quick glance at him and did not take it to heart. But now, she finally understood that the figure reflected in the mirror was not her husband, Rongxiu, but the emperor. At this moment, Rongxiu finally spoke. His voice was as deep and pleasant as usual, but compared to his usual gentleness, it was colder and more noble. He looked at her and said word by word, "Shengguanyu, come here." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the main hall looked at Chu Luyue in shock. Why did the emperor suddenly call for this woman? Chu Luyue also came back to her senses. Soon after, she frowned slightly. Shengguanyu? He had always called her you, This was the first time that Chu Luyue heard him call her you, It was extremely unfamiliar. Su Li, Mu Hongyu, and the others were already stunned when they saw Rongxiu walk in. When she heard him call out her name like that, she was completely stunned. What was going on? They had already guessed that the Holy Sun was an emperor. But what was he trying to do now? They couldn't help but look at Chu Luyue. The surrounding atmosphere was cold, and even the space seemed to be frozen. Then, Chu Luyue gently exhaled and stepped forward. In the main hall, everyone's eyes were focused on her. But Chu Luyue didn't care. She walked forward step by step and finally stood 3 steps away from Rongxiu. Here, the extremely powerful and domineering aura around him was so oppressive that she couldn't breathe. Of course, she knew that he didn't do it on purpose. It was just because he was too powerful that he naturally exuded an astonishing aura. Chu Luyue looked up at him slightly. Here, she could see him more clearly. But she couldn't understand. Chu Luyue never thought that there would be a day when they would face each other. He was the person closest to her. She had entrusted her entire body, trust, love, past, and future to this man. Without hesitation, she gave him everything. She had thought that no one in this world would understand him better than she did. But now, she finally knew that wasn't the case. She was so familiar with him, but she couldn't understand him. Emperor? She spoke softly. She seemed to be asking, but also seemed to be confirming something. Rongxiu stared at her, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Then, he raised his arms slightly, and 4 streams of light flew out. The 4 streams of light flew past Chu Liuyue's ears and turned into 4 rings at the center of the hall. The appearance of this ring was very special because the color on it was formed by the intertwining of 2 extreme colors, gold and black. Furthermore, the patterns on the 4 rings were different from each other. There are 4 paths to choose from to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Which one will you choose? Rongxiu asked calmly. Hearing this, many people came to a realization. So this was why the emperor had called her? Well, it was said that she was an all-rounder, and indeed had the potential to ascend to the heavens and become a god in more than one cultivation method. But the key was what she chose. Chu Luyue didn't look back at the 4 rings. She looked at Rongxiu, raised her chin slightly, and said, "The emperor is knowledgeable. The celestial emperor is experienced and knowledgeable. You should help me choose." As soon as she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became a little strange. Yu Qian and the others couldn't help but frown. What did she mean? She wanted the emperor to choose for her? Did she think she was, "Then I'll choose a mystic master"? Rongxiu said. Chu Liuyue's lips curved. What a coincidence, I was also about to choose this. After all, I spent the most time and energy on this some time ago. Everyone only thought that she was talking about walking the path of stars. Only Shang Wanjing, Su Li, and the others knew that she was referring to the chess game that the two of them had played for several days. They looked at each other and tacitly kept silent. At this time, it seemed that it was better to wait and see. Rongxiu lowered his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him. There was a smile at the corner of her lips, but her pair of bright starry eyes were calm and serious. Since the emperor has said so, I'll choose this. As Chu Luiyue spoke, she turned around and was about to walk over. However, just as she took a step, she suddenly felt something tighten around her waist. She was stunned and looked down. Suddenly, Rongxiu grabbed Tuan Xian's tongue that was tied to her waist. She blinked and looked up at Rongxiu strangely. His eyelids drooped slightly, and his slender fingers gently lifted and untied the round tongue. Since we're already here, there's no need to keep this thing. Seeing this scene, Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. Emperor, the round tongue is something that people without a bloodline totem have to wear. It's not appropriate to take it off like this. Rongxiu didn't say anything. He closed his fingers and put away the round tongue. Mu Qinghe tactfully swallowed the rest of her words. Yu Qian and the others also felt that this wasn't good, but the other party was the emperor after all. Moreover, what he said was right. Since they had already reached the step of ascending to the heavens and breaking through the gods, there was indeed no point in keeping that thing. Chu Luiyue looked at Rongxiu, tilted her head, and raised the corner of her lips into an ambiguous smile. Then, she suddenly moved closer and lowered her voice so that only the two of them could hear. The emperor's technique is really becoming more and more skilled. This bundle of tongues was decapitated really quickly. Rongxiu paused and raised his eyes slightly, looking at her dangerously. Chapter 2453. Chu Luiyue knew when to stop. She immediately turned to leave and stepped into the circle that belonged to the mystic masters. As soon as she entered, she instantly felt an indescribable pressure enveloping her. That gaze filled with warning and threat lingered on her body for a moment before finally moving away. She licked the roof of her mouth with the tip of her tongue. After a while, her red lips curled into a smile. If he wanted to act, she would just accompany him. She wanted to see what exactly he was trying to do by going through so much trouble. You have 15 minutes to make your final choice. Rongxiu's voice broke the strange silence in the main hall. Only then did everyone recover from the previous incident and start to head towards the area that they had chosen. But there were also some people who were still full of doubts. Just now, why did the emperor's attitude towards that girl seem a little different? If he had called her over because she was an all-rounder and wanted her to choose one of the 4 paths, it would still be understandable. But that ball of tongue, couldn't he just get her to remove it herself? The emperor was noble and cold, mysterious and powerful. Even the divine envoys did not dare to get close to him. But now, how should they put it? Anyway, it was a little strange. However, when they looked at Chu Luiyue again, they saw that her expression was normal, as if she did not take what had just happened to heart. This, little Hachi looked at Chi Han and asked. 7th brother, should we also take this thing down? Chi Han nodded. Little Hachi was a little happy. Her red lips curled up into a smile. That's great. I've always felt that this thing was very cumbersome. And it's very ugly. Now, I can finally remove it. As she thought, she reached out to the ball of tongue on Chi Han's waist. Then, 7th brother, let me help you remove this thing. Anyway, they did not have the guts to ask the emperor to remove it. Are you tired of living? However, before she could reach out, a cold and threatening sword aura suddenly came. Swish. The ball of tongue on Chi Han's waist was instantly cut and fell. Little Eight's eyes widened slightly as he turned his head to look. Yan Qing had already walked in with a sword in his hand. He was the one who attacked just now. Little Eight didn't even have time to react before he felt a chill at his waist. Then, the ball of tongue on her body was instantly cut off. In the next moment, several balls of tongue flew towards him. Enchanting's sword was very fast and accurate. With just one slash, all of their tongues had been cut off. Moreover, although this sword aura was to be exact, it did not hurt. Soon, he collected all the tongues of the people's tongues and handed to Rongxiu. Emperor. Rongxiu lightly waved his hand, and all the items landed in his sleeves. Quietly, he disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, everyone's the emperor's eyes too. Anyway, it two's Tahachi's too. Her. She scratched the air, feeling a little disappointed. Then, she glared at Enchanting. Why was he in such a hurry? Couldn't he wait for her to remove it herself? What if she was hurt by that sword? Of course, she knew that with Enchanting's strength, he would not make such a mistake. But, didn't he see how the emperor did it? Although the emperor had lied to her master, he was still capable of doing such a thing. Chihan glanced at Enchanting and patted little Hachi's shoulder lightly. You haven't recovered from your injury yet. Be careful later. Little Hachi pouted. Okay. Soon, all the cultivators who were waiting for the chance to ascend to the heavens and become a god had already taken their places. Swish. Rongxiu waved his hand, and the Pantheon record appeared. Light flashed on it, and one could vaguely see the names of people on it. However, perhaps because the light was too bright, or perhaps because the pressure was too strong, people could not look directly at it. Thus, no one could see the names on it clearly. The name of the person who ascends to the heavens and becomes a god will automatically appear on the first volume of the Pantheon record. Rongxiu said. Hearing this, everyone's heart skipped a beat. At the same time, they were faintly excited. Most of them had been waiting for this day for tens of thousands of years. Now, the moment had finally arrived. How could they not be moved? Buzz. Rongxiu's mind moved, and a ray of light shot out from the Pantheon record. At the same time, a huge phantom suddenly appeared in the sky above the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. It was the Pantheon record. Compared to the one Rongxiu had in the main hall, this phantom was obviously much bigger. Everyone who was waiting outside the main gate of the palace of the illusory god immediately became noisy when they saw this scene. Pantheon record. The emperor summoned the Pantheon record. Is it finally going to start? I wonder who will succeed in ascending to the heavens and becoming a god this time. It's hard to say for others, but I'm most curious about the Shengguanyu. Do you think she can do it without a bloodline totem? I'm afraid it's hard to say. If it was before, they would definitely deny this possibility immediately. However, after experiencing so many things during this period of time, the people who had been repeatedly slapped in the face finally had experience and did not dare to make arbitrary judgments. Other than the emperor, no one else can see the names on the Pantheon record. Only when the cultivator ascends to the heavens and becomes a god will the world witness it. I wonder, who will be the first to ascend to the heavens and become a god this time? Engrave your name on the Pantheon record. Chapter 2454. Buzz. A buzzing sound rang in her ears. In the next moment, a star appeared in front of Chu Luiyue. This star flickered with a golden light and was brilliant. She was extremely familiar with the aura on it. It was Rongxiu's power. Then, a second star, a third star. Not long after, her entire body was filled with countless starlight. There was a subtle connection between these dots of light that couldn't be ignored. Chu Luiyue looked around and quickly understood. This was a Xian formation. However, it was different from the flat Xian formations that she had seen in the past. The one that Rongxiu executed was completely three-dimensional. Cultivators would merge into the Xian formation and coexist with it. Only by deciphering this Xian formation could she take the most important step. Chu Luiyue took a light breath. This stage, as expected, was much more difficult than expected. Even she might not be able to decipher it easily. Xiao Ran was standing not far behind her. When he saw these floating and flickering stars, he came back to his senses after a while. Damn, isn't this a trap? So difficult. How am I going to pass this? He couldn't help but sneak a glance at Chu Luiyue, only to see that she had already begun to stare at the light dots in front of her and was deep in thought. Xiao Ran was very uncomfortable. Ever since he saw the Emperor's appearance, he had almost gone crazy. Who else could it be if not the man who accompanied that little girl every day? What happened to coming up from the divine ruins world? What happened to being a genius who didn't care about fame and fortune? In the blink of an eye, he became an emperor? Xiao Ran didn't want to accept this reality at first, but later on, he realized that Chu Luiyue didn't seem to know about this either. Only then did he feel better. However, the situation now was too complicated, causing him to almost lose the mood to cultivate. Just as he was thinking, Chu Luiyue had already raised her hand. A stream of divine power flew out from her fingertip and connected the two stars in front of her. Xiao Ran was secretly shocked. He couldn't help but sigh. Chu Luiyue's talent in this area was indeed not something that they could compare to. In such a short period of time, she had actually found a way to break it. Even though this was just the beginning, it was enough to show her potential. Suddenly, another slight fluctuation came from the side. Xiao Ran turned his head to take a look and was shocked to find that Chi Han had also started to make his move. Xiao Ran and the other mystic cultivators present, this master and servant pair really didn't give others a chance to live. Xiao Ran had no choice but to suppress the surging emotions in his heart. He focused his eyes and began to comprehend this Xian formation as well. At the same time, the cultivators in the other three regions also began their own cultivation. However, Mu Hongyu was a little special. She was not suited for any of the four ways. A golden stream of light flew out from Rong Xiu's palm and formed a barrier around her. Black lines crisscrossed on it. At a glance, it looked like a cage. The body of Void Yuan can break through the fence and ascend to the heavens and become a god. Rong Xiu said. Mu Hongyu nodded and looked around carefully. Then, her gaze focused as a deep shock flashed across her eyes. Because those crisscrossing black lines were actually spatial cracks caused by the collision of different spaces. The barrier that Rong Xiu cast contained extremely shocking spatial power. At a rough glance, there were at least 100 spaces compressed into this small barrier. Seeing this, Mu Hongyu sucked in a breath of cold air. Rong Xiu. As expected of an emperor. The moment he made a move, he already had such shocking strength. She clenched her fists and tried to calm herself down. Then, she began to study seriously. The huge main hall of the illusory god palace fell into silence. Rong Xiu stood with his hands behind his back. No emotions could be seen on his handsome and noble face. The Pantheon record floated quietly and flickered. Time passed silently. In front of Chu Luiyue, several streams of light crisscrossed and connected the stars. Her speed was very fast. Even if Yu Qian and the others didn't like her, they had to admit that Chu Luiyue was indeed far superior to others in this aspect. If this continued, could she really ascend to the heavens and become a god? At this moment, a strong fluctuation suddenly came from behind the illusory god palace. Boom! A huge sound was heard. Everyone was shocked. Mu Qinghe was startled at first. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, a dark light flashed across her eyes. Yu Qian, on the other hand, was delighted. Dumpling is opening her 8th meridian. He definitely wouldn't be wrong about this movement. Hearing this, the remaining divine envoys were also very surprised. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. Yu Qian couldn't hide his excitement. He cupped his fists and said to the figure hidden in the silver-red light, "Divine Master, since Dumpling has opened her 8th meridian, can you allow Yu Qian to bring her to the main palace?" After a while, the voice said, "Yes. Yes." Yu Qian's heart beat violently. He had been busy with Dumpling's matter. Now that she had finally opened her 8th meridian, the Divine Master must be very happy. This could definitely be considered a great contribution. After answering, he immediately turned and walked out of the illusory god palace, planning to bring Dumpling here. However, when he passed by Chu Luiyue, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Then, he turned his head and looked at Chu Luiyue in disbelief. The aura on her body was also rising rapidly. This was a ridiculous and bold guess came to his mind. Yu Qian shouted sternly. You didn't break the contract with Dumpling. Chapter 2455. His cold voice reverberated throughout the main hall, clearly falling into everyone's ears. Almost everyone could not hide their shock as they looked over. Chu Luiyue did not break the contract with Dumpling. How was that possible? Wasn't she forced to cut off contact with Dumpling a few months ago? And it seemed like Yu Qian was the one in charge at that time. But now, he actually said, no? Hearing this, Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Previously, they had hidden this matter extremely well, and the Yu Qian had never found out about it. But they did not expect that Dumpling's 8th meridian to undergo such a huge change in her strength, which led to this matter being exposed. Yu Qian did not say anything and immediately attacked. An astonishingly vigorous divine power suddenly flew out, heading straight for Chu Luiyue. Buzz! However, the divine power was immediately blocked when it reached the ring. The divine power of the brilliant gold and the dark black intertwined and instantly strangled it. Almost at the same time, Rong Xiu's deep and cold voice sounded, Yu Qian, how dare you? Yu Qian's face turned pale when he heard this. In his anger, he actually forgot that this was the power of an emperor. Wasn't he offending the emperor by acting so rashly? Emperor, please forgive me. He immediately looked at Rong Xiu. Yu Qian didn't do it on purpose, but this Shangguan Yu is really too daring. Previously, I ordered her to break the contract with the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix, but I didn't expect her to do this. That's because you're incompetent. Rong Xiu interrupted him. Every word seemed to be wrapped in a powerful aura, almost suffocating everyone. Yu Qian's heart trembled violently. It was a great humiliation to be reprimanded by the emperor in front of so many people. Most importantly, he had no way to refute it. At that time, he was indeed the one who personally supervised and watched them cancel the contract. He really thought that the matter was over. Who would have thought that Chu Luiyue would make such a move? Moreover, even after such a long time had passed since then, he still hadn't noticed anything unusual. Yu Qian felt as if he had been slapped hard in the face. His face was burning with pain. When ascending to the heavens and becoming a god, no one is allowed to interfere. Rong Xiu's expression did not change, but his voice was cold. Violators, die. These words caused the entire main hall of the illusory god palace to fall into a deathly silence once again. Yu Qian clenched his fists, his heart burning with anxiety. If something were to happen and the divine master blamed him, he would have to bear the responsibility alone. However, the emperor had already spoken and his attitude was firm. Unless he was tired of living, he would not go against the emperor's order and forcefully attack Chu Luiyue. But, could it be that they were just going to watch? Let her ascend to the heavens and become a deity? Yu Qian couldn't help but turn around and look at the divine master. However, perhaps because he was afraid of the emperor, the divine master didn't say anything. Yu Qian thought about it and gritted his teeth. I'll go and bring her here first. With that, he turned around and left quickly. In any case, the divine master and the others were here. Even if the contract between Chu Luiyue and Dumpling hadn't been broken, there would definitely be a way when the time came. After all, Dumpling was too important to the divine master now. Yu Qian's figure quickly disappeared outside the door. After he left, the people in the main hall were left looking at each other. In the end, their gazes all fell on Chu Luiyue. What method did this Chu Luiyue use to deceive even Yu Qian? Shangguan Jing and the others were filled with worry. Yu Qian's reaction was huge. There was no guarantee that he would do something. Even if she could escape this calamity for now, what about after she ascended to the heavens and became a god? At that time, what she would have to face would be huge trouble. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she had already regained her calmness. She didn't expect to be able to hide it forever. This matter would be discovered sooner or later. It was just that she had chosen an extremely delicate time. Right now, she only hoped that Dumpling would be safe and sound. It wouldn't be too late to deal with everything after she ascended to the heavens and became a god. Feng Ming Mountain. A small figure was wrapped in the scarlet gold flames. The flames burned fiercely, and the scorching heat almost caused the surrounding space to distort. Not far in front of her, the two Tian baby was swaying in the wind. Under the roasting of the scarlet gold flames, the tender green leaves seemed to become even more vibrant and rich. Dumpling's eyes were tightly shut. On her forehead, the totem of the crimson gold sky phoenix clan slowly appeared. At a certain moment, a soft sound came from her body. Finally. She suddenly opened her eyes. That pair of black grape-like eyes were already filled with brilliant flames. A vast pressure suddenly erupted from her body. 8th meridian, open. At the same time, Mao Zhen, who was standing outside the barrier of Feng Ming Mountain, sensed the commotion and frowned. She looked in the direction of Feng Ming Mountain with a complicated and unfathomable expression. It's actually so fast, he muttered softly. In fact, after bidding farewell to Dumpling that day, although he had left Feng Ming Mountain, he had not gone far. Instead, he had been guarding this place. He originally thought that it would take a lot of time for Dumpling to open her 8th meridian. Who knew that it would actually be much earlier than expected? Standing here, separated by the barrier, it was actually impossible to see the situation inside clearly. However, that shocking fluctuation could not be concealed. Dumpling had indeed successfully opened her 8th meridian. Mao Zhen's gaze turned and looked at the myriad god record that was quietly floating above the main hall of the illusory god palace. As expected, the contract hasn't been rescinded. Inside the illusory god palace, Chu Luiyue was preparing to ascend to the heavens and become a god. On Feng Ming Mountain, Dumpling was preparing to open her meridians. Other than the fact that the contract was still there was no other possibility. Actually, he had already had this guess in his heart, but he had never had the chance to verify it. But now, he was finally certain. But those people from the illusory god palace should already know, right? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw a figure hurriedly walk out of the illusory god palace, heading straight for this place. Yu Qian. Mao Zhen's heart tightened. Looking at the Yu Qian's formation, the situation seemed to be worse than he had expected. Just as he was thinking, the Yu Qian had already arrived. Seeing Mao Zhen, the Yu Qian was also shocked. However, he only frowned and did not pay much attention to Mao Zhen as he headed straight for Feng Ming Mountain. This place was under his control, so he could naturally come and go as he pleased. Mao Zhen originally wanted to exchange a few pleasantries, but seeing this scene, he swallowed the rest of his words. He began to feel uneasy in his heart. Dumpling let out a long breath. After opening her 8th meridian, it was indeed very different from before. Suddenly, she paused and turned her head abruptly. Hong Yao? She spoke with some uncertainty. She pursed her lips, put her hands behind her back, and did not speak. If Hong Yao came out to apologize to her now, she would forgive it. Chapter 2456. After waiting for a while, Hong Yao still didn't come out. Dumpling pouted. I'll count to 3. If Hong Yao still didn't come out, she wouldn't talk to it anymore. At that time, even if Hong Yao came to apologize to her again, she wouldn't give it another chance. 1. There was no movement. Dumpling frowned. 2. There was still no movement. Dumpling paced back and forth, feeling very annoyed. Did Hong Yao really not care at all? What was so good about Mu Qinghe that it was so loyal to her? 2, 1. Dumpling began to count with her fingers. At this moment, she heard the sound of wind behind her. Dumpling was delighted and turned around. Haha. I knew it was you, when she saw Yu Qian who suddenly appeared in front of her, the smile on Dumpling's face froze. For a moment, she was confused and angry. "Why are you here?" she thought. "Why can't it be me?" Yu Qian looked at Dumpling coldly. Dumpling sensed that something was wrong and immediately became vigilant. You didn't break the contract with Shengguanyu," Yu Qian said coldly and confidently. Dumpling's pupils constricted slightly. He actually knew. "Come with me." Seeing Dumpling's reaction, Yu Qian became even angrier. He stepped forward and tried to grab Dumpling's hand. Dumpling immediately dodged and stared at him with hostility. "What do you want to do?" "This person is very dangerous," Yu Qian sneered. "You'll know what I want to do soon." As he spoke, a black vine as thick as a thumb suddenly flew out of his sleeve and went straight to Dumpling. Dumpling had a bad feeling and immediately retreated. At the same time, she set up a flame barrier in front of her. However, a scene that shocked her happened. The black vine directly passed through the flames. The blazing heat and tyrannical power seemed to be unable to do anything to it. What the hell is this? While Dumpling was thinking, the vine had already flown over and tightly wrapped around her wrists. This vine was very flexible and had sharp thorns on it. The moment it touched Dumpling's skin, it easily pierced through it. A sharp pain came from her wrists. Dumpling was shocked. She looked down and saw that there were drops of blood on her wrists. These drops of blood didn't fall to the ground. Instead, they were directly absorbed by the vine. A strong sense of uneasiness suddenly surged into Tuanzi's heart. She still remembered clearly all the torture she had suffered in the Red Moon Desert. This scene was all too familiar. "Let me go." Dumpling immediately began to struggle. However, this black vine was very strange. The more she struggled, the tighter it became. The blood in her body also gushed out at an even faster rate and was swallowed by it. Yu Qian snorted coldly, grabbed Dumpling, and turned around to head towards the palace of the illusory god. Dumpling, who had already opened her 8th meridian, was indeed much stronger than before. However, compared to Yu Qian, she was still slightly inferior. The two figures quickly disappeared from Fengming Mountain. A moment later, a small green shadow flashed out from behind a rock. It was Red Demon. Seeing Dumpling being taken away, it was extremely anxious. Almost without any hesitation, it flapped its wings and quickly chased after him. Mao Zhen also saw this scene. Long ago, when Yu Qian came aggressively, he already felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, not long after, Yu Qian forcefully brought Dumpling out. Yu Qian's speed was very fast, leaving only a few afterimages in the air. However, Mao Zhen's eyesight was extremely good, and he immediately saw that Dumpling's body was stained with blood. He frowned tightly. Then, his body moved and he immediately chased after her. Yu Qian did not deliberately hide his figure this time, so everyone outside the palace of the illusory god also saw him. Just as everyone was puzzled as to why he suddenly came out, they saw that Yu Qian had already brought Dumpling back. Looking at this situation, it was really not good. Isn't that the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan who had been staying at Fengming Mountain? Why did the second divine envoy suddenly bring her here? Looking at the situation, it doesn't look good. She seems to be tied up. I saw it too. There seems to be blood on her body. Strange, didn't the second divine envoy always treat her very generously before? What is he planning to do now? The ancestors of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan betrayed the palace of the illusory god back then. As a sinner, how could the second divine envoy really treat her well? Judging from the commotion just now, she seems to have opened her 8th meridian. I wonder what the second divine envoy is planning to do. Everyone was discussing and making all sorts of guesses. Yu Qian had already brought Dumpling back to the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. Let me go. Dumpling struggled the entire way, but Yu Qian was too strong and she was no match for him. When Yu Qian finally stopped, she realized that she had been brought to the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. Hearing this, Yu Qian sneered and pushed Dumpling fiercely. "Kneel down." Dumpling's hands were tied. After being pushed like this, she lost her balance and staggered, almost falling to the ground. She barely managed to stabilize her body and said angrily, "If you want to kneel, kneel by yourself." "I won't kneel." Everyone turned to look at him, including Chu Luiyue. When she saw the messy bloodstains on the little girl's body, her heart felt like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. It was stuffy and painful. "Dumpling." She finally couldn't help but shout. Dumpling came back to her senses and hurriedly turned her head. Only then did she see Chu Luiyue standing in the middle of the golden light. "Ah, you." She didn't even think and ran towards her. However, just as she ran 2 steps, Yu Qian suddenly stopped and the black vines immediately tightened. This time, Dumpling finally fell heavily to the ground. There was a muffled sound. More and more blood began to drip from her wrist. "Yu Qian." Chu Luiyue's chest and abdomen seemed to be on fire as she shouted angrily. Yu Qian subconsciously raised his head and looked at her. "You shouted." Just as he was about to mock her, he met Chu Luiyue's eyes and his heart inexplicably trembled. At this moment, Chu Luiyue seemed a little different from before. That pair of starry eyes that were always shining brightly were now bottomless black. It was as if they were covered in frost that had been frozen for thousands of years, and the coldness was bone-chilling. Just this one glance actually caused him to faintly feel a trace of fear. "Ah, you." "Dumpling is fine." Dumpling gritted her teeth and stood up. She looked at her with red eyes and sniffed hard. "Ah, you, don't worry." She had always been extremely smart. With just a glance, she knew that Chu Luiyue was at the critical moment of ascending to heaven and becoming a god. She couldn't disturb her. Thinking of this, she revealed a big smile. "I'll wait here for you to come out." Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly ached. Chapter 2457. At this moment, Yu Qian finally came back to his senses. He frowned. What the hell? At that moment, he was actually a little afraid of Chu Luiyue. She had yet to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Moreover, even if she really did become a god, she wouldn't be a match for him. After all, he had already crossed that threshold for 10,000 years. This feeling made Yu Qian very angry. He must be crazy to think that a mere Chu Luiyue could pose any threat to him. What a deep relationship between master and servant. He sneered and mocked. When he thought about how he had been deceived for so long, he was extremely angry. He couldn't wait to kill Chu Luiyue and Dumpling immediately. To think that he had repeatedly made concessions in order to make Dumpling listen to him. He thought that everything was under control, but who knew that they hadn't broken the contract from the beginning? The scenes of the past kept replaying in Yu Qian's mind, reminding him over and over again of the stupid things he had done in the past. Yu Qian was about to die of anger. Therefore, all the shock and anger at this moment turned into deep hatred. These two must pay the price for what they had done. Just as he was about to attack again, a hoarse and low voice suddenly sounded. "Yu Qian, stop." Yu Qian's movements came to a halt. He took a deep breath, lifted the hem of his clothes, and knelt on the ground with one knee. Yu Qian has failed in his task. Please punish him, Divine Master. Although you couldn't break the contract with them, but, at least you've opened your 8th meridian. Consider it atonement. This meant that he didn't intend to pursue Yu Qian's mistake. Yu Qian was obviously very surprised. After being stunned for a moment, he heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Divine Master. Come here." The Divine Master spoke again, but this time, it was obviously not directed at Yu Qian. "He's calling for Dumpling." Dumpling frowned, her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground, unwilling to move. She looked at the blurry figure vigilantly. Then, she suddenly remembered something and widened her eyes in shock. It's you. This person was the main culprit who had trapped and tortured her in the Red Moon Desert. Even though it was only an eye that had appeared at that time, there was no way she would be mistaken. This was the person. I said, come here. There was a trace of coldness in that person's voice. Then, before Tuanzi could react, the figure suddenly raised his hand. Following this action, the black vines that were tightly wrapped around Dumpling quickly flew up. Dumpling's body was dragged forward uncontrollably. Boom! Reddish gold flames instantly ignited. However, this kind of counterattack did not have any effect at all. That person seemed to laugh. Back then, even Yi Ling was no match for me, let alone you. Dumpling was shocked. Ancestor Yi Ling had opened 9 meridians. If even he could not do it, then, she began to struggle frantically. With her previous experience in the Red Moon Desert, she knew very well what awaited her if she fell into the other party's hands. Unfortunately, this bit of strength was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of the other party. Dumpling clenched her teeth, but what she got in return was an even more bone-piercing and intense pain. The black vines tightened around her wrists and dragged her away, as though they were about to break her hands. At the same time, the blood in her body was continuously being devoured by that thing. The vines that were originally dark and gloomy were gradually suffused with streaks of blood-red color. It looked very strange. Chu Liuyue's heart felt as if it had been viciously twisted by something, and it was extremely painful. In front of her, a large number of stars had already connected, forming an extremely unique Xian formation. As long as it continued smoothly, she would definitely be able to ascend to the heavens and become a god. And if she stopped now, all her previous efforts would be wasted. She moved her feet. At this moment, Dumpling seemed to have sensed her thoughts and immediately shouted, "No. Ah, you, don't." She looked at Chu Luyue with reddened eyes and shook her head desperately. No. No. No one knew better than her how much Ayu had suffered for this day. It had not been easy, it had not been easy. If she gave up now, wouldn't all the years of suffering and suffering she had suffered in the past be in vain? She did not want this to happen. She wanted Ayu to be well. At this moment, the black vines had already extended upwards and wrapped around her arms. More and more blood flowed out from the wounds. The thick smell of blood quickly spread throughout the entire main hall. The 8th meridian is still a little lacking. The Divine Master spoke indifferently. Unfortunately, you still have a contract with her, so this is the only way. As soon as he finished speaking, the black vines instantly wrapped around Dumpling's neck. Chu Liuyue's heart skipped a beat. However, at this moment, a muscular snow-white figure suddenly pounced from outside the main hall. It was Shua. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of Dumpling. Then, it bit toward the black vines without hesitation. "Emperor, are you trying to interfere with the private affairs of the palace of the illusory god?" The Divine Master suddenly asked. Hearing this, Chu Luyue subconsciously turned around and looked at Rongxiu. No emotion could be seen on his noble and cold face. Then, he spoke. Shua, come back." His voice was calm and dignified. Shua paused. It was only a moment of pause, but the black rattan wrapped tightly around Tuanzi's neck in an instant. The sharp thorns cut her skin, and a drop of dark red blood instantly appeared. Digression, friendly reminder, from now until the end, there will be a lot of new information every day. Please follow the story as you see fit. Before the end, don't think of handing the author a knife. Cough. Also, regarding Rongxiu lying to you, everyone felt that you should be angry and should make a scene. But in reality, after knowing the existence of the 13 divine envoys, she would not do that. After all, she already knew that Rongxiu was not the only one lying to her. De Bao and the others were also lying to her. She would only be willing to be lied to if she believed. But at the same time, it also exposed her relationship with Dabao. Chu Luyue didn't say anything, and only stared at the profound formation in front of him. He had to be fast. He had to be faster. Now that she was inside the ring, no one could disturb her as long as she didn't go out. This was the best chance. She had to complete the profound formation as soon as possible and ascend to the god level. Just as well. I'm looking for this thing. As soon as he finished speaking, the black rattan flew up again. Chi! With the sound of the air being torn apart, the vine instantly split into two and attacked Zichen and Tuanzi respectively. Zichen hugged Dumpling tightly and quickly retreated. Smack! As soon as he left, the black rattan viciously left a mark on the ground where he had been standing. Zichen's brows were tightly knitted. He had already experienced the prowess of this thing just now. He could temporarily rely on the purple gold divine armor to deal with it, but as time passed, he was afraid that, just as this thought surfaced in his mind, a heavy aura surged toward him from all directions. Zichen's chest tightened. He felt as if his entire body had sunk into a quagmire, and it was difficult for him to move. The power of a divine lord was indeed more terrifying than anyone he had met before. Smack! The black rattan vine swung down again. Zichen was about to retreat when he realized that he could no longer control his body. Even the act of raising his hand had become extremely difficult. Just as he paused for a moment, smack! A black rattan viciously whipped his right shoulder. In an instant, his flesh was torn open. This blow was extremely powerful. Even though Zichen had an extremely strong physical body, he couldn't withstand it. However, the second rattan vines followed closely behind, heading straight for Dumpling. Zichen's expression turned serious. Since he couldn't avoid it, he chose to block it with his arm. Smack! Blood gushed out, and one could even vaguely see the ghastly white bones. Zichen! Dumpling panicked when she saw this. Previously, Zichen had been severely injured in order to save her, and it took him a long time to recover. She didn't want the same thing to happen again. Zichen, put me down. Dumpling struggled to jump down. They want to kill me. I don't want to implicate you. Zichen pursed his thin lips and hugged her even tighter. The two sides were in a stalemate. Drip. Drip. Droplets of blood dripped onto the ground and soon dyed it red. Beside them, Shueshue was scratching its ears and cheeks anxiously when it saw this scene. It looked at Rong Xiu for help, its claws scratching restlessly. Its ice-blue eyes were filled with worry and anxiety. Was he really not going to help? Even if Zichen had the purple gold divine armor, he was definitely not that person's match. And Dumpling, at this moment, the black rattan vines swept over again. Suddenly, a barrier appeared in front of Zichen and Shueshue. Wait! Everyone turned around and saw that the person was none other than Mao Zhen. Digression, at around 6:30 p.m. Chapter 2459. Mao Zhen hurried over. Due to his special status, he could enter and leave as he pleased. However, he had never stepped into the Illusion God Palace ever since he arrived. This was the first time. No one expected that he would suddenly appear at a time like this. Clan leader Mao Zhen? What do you mean by this? Are you helping them? Yu Qian snorted and questioned Mao Zhen when he saw him. Mao Zhen stepped forward and quickly scanned the hall, taking in everything that was happening in the hall. When he saw Zichen and Dumpling's injured state, he frowned slightly. However, he quickly regained his composure. Second Divine Envoy, you've misunderstood. I'm here for the Divine Master. Yu Qian narrowed his eyes. The Divine Master seemed interested. Oh? What do you mean? Mao Zhen looked up and quickly glanced forward. The Divine Master's figure and appearance were blurry and difficult to distinguish. However, he was certain that he was the person who had appeared in the Red Moon Desert. How could he have known that the person was the Divine Master of the Illusion God Palace? An. Rongxiu. Mao Zhen took a deep breath and suppressed the confusion in his heart. Dumpling has already opened her 8th meridian and is only one step away from opening her 9th meridian. It would be a pity if she died here. The Divine Master should also hope that Dumpling can open her 9th meridian, right? There was no doubt about that. Otherwise, the incident in the Red Moon Desert wouldn't have happened. However, he didn't know why the Divine Master was so anxious. Dumpling had the purest bloodline. As long as everything went smoothly, it was only a matter of time before she opened her 9th meridian. Why did he have to resort to such drastic measures? She has a contract with Shangguanyu, so I must kill her. The Divine Master's voice sounded regretful, but more than that, it was filled with murderous intent. Back then, Yiling betrayed the Illusion God Palace and implicated the entire Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Now, I've given her a chance because of her purest bloodline. Unfortunately, she didn't cherish it. Besides, Mao Zhen, don't forget how the ancestor of the great Phoenix Dragon tribe died. Now that you're speaking up for her, aren't you afraid of letting Mao Yu down? Mao Zhen's heart trembled. Many emotions welled up in his heart. He looked at Dumpling with a complicated expression. Sensing his gaze, Dumpling looked at him blankly. Could it be that the death of the great Void Phoenix Dragon race's ancestor was also related to what happened to the ancestor back then? After a long time, Mao Zhen finally sighed and didn't speak any further. Of course, he had come here to save Tuanzi and Zichen. On the one hand, they were both Chu Liuyue's contracted magical beasts, and he still owed Chu Liuyue a favor. On the other hand, he himself was very fond of these two. He really couldn't just sit by and watch them get killed. Dumpling suddenly said, "Grandpa Mao Zhen, thank you. But this is my problem, so I will take responsibility for it myself." As she spoke, she looked at Zichen and pursed her lips. "Zichen, I'm also saying this to you." Zichen frowned. Hot tears rolled down from her eyes and dripped on the back of Zichen's hand, almost burning his heart. "I want all you to be fine, and I want you to be fine." Her voice was a little choked and hoarse, but it was unusually firm. With Mao Zhen here, Zichen's life could probably be saved. Yu was preparing to ascend to heaven and become a god, so she would definitely be fine. She sniffed and gently patted Zichen's shoulder. "Zichen, put me down." Zichen didn't move. Dumpling stretched out her arms, hugged his neck, and rubbed her face against his neck. "Zichen, I don't want others to get hurt for me, and I don't want others to die for me. That would make her feel even worse." Zichen's body stiffened. After a long time, he finally bent down and put her down. Dumpling stood in front of him and tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him with red eyes and said patiently and seriously, "I will come back. During this time, you have to take good care of Yu." Zichen looked at her with a deep gaze and made a sound of acknowledgement. After thinking for a moment, he reached out and wiped the tears off her face. Dumpling let go of his hand. When she turned around again, the crying expression on her face had completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by an indomitable determination. She took a step forward, stared straight ahead, and asked, "You want to kill me?" "The descendant of the sinners is stubborn and should be killed." "Humph," Dumpling sneered coldly. It was just an excuse. Anyway, she didn't believe that her ancestors would betray their masters. Only the people back then knew the truth. What happened later was just a rumor. "It's not impossible for you to kill me, but before that, I have a question." She clenched her fists and stared at the blurry figure in front of her. The past kept replaying in her mind. She said word by word, "Do you want to kill me, or, do you want the power of my bloodline?" As soon as she finished her question, the entire hall fell into a dead silence. The Divine Master didn't answer her question and directly chose to attack. "Humph." The black vines merged into one again and went straight for Dumpling. A look of determination flashed across Dumpling's eyes. Boom! A wisp of crimson gold flames suddenly ignited and covered her entire body in an instant. Screech! A clear and distant cry of the phoenix spread out from Tuan Zi's body. Chapter 2460. In an instant, this phoenix cry spread far and wide between heaven and earth. The flames burned crazily, and in an instant, it had completely surrounded Dumpling into a fireball. The terrifyingly high temperature caused the surrounding space to begin to distort. A reddish-gold ancestor's golden feather floated out from it. Zichen subconsciously raised his hand and grabbed it very close to his hand. His eyes were fixed on the little person in the flames. In the next moment, Dumpling transformed into her true form and rushed out quickly. Dumpling. Chu Luiyue was shocked and quickly looked back. As far as her eyes could see, there was only the figure wrapped in the scorching reddish-gold flames and leaving quickly. Her feet moved. Just as she was about to move, an intense pain suddenly surged into her mind. It was as if something sharp was crazily stabbing into the depths of her mind. It was sharp and painful. In a daze, a blurry image seemed to appear in front of her eyes. It was also a crimson gold sky phoenix that flew up from the grand and majestic hall. At that time, the sky was dark, and only the reddish gold flames burning around its body were brilliant, almost illuminating half of the sky. It was strong, bright, and engraved in the bones and blood. Chu Luiyue was suddenly stunned. Just when she wanted to see it more clearly, the image suddenly disappeared. It was clean and nothing was left. Only the hoarse phoenix cry was left, hovering in her ears for a long time. That was, her hands trembled slightly, and then her entire body stiffened and became numb. All the blood in her body seemed to have frozen at this moment. That wasn't Dumpling. Although the image only appeared for a moment, and she didn't even take a closer look, she was sure that it wasn't Dumpling. The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan could only transform into a human when they were 100 years old. They were considered to have officially reached adulthood. However, Dumpling was still a child. Even if she returned to her true form, her figure was still smaller than an ordinary Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix. So, if it wasn't Dumpling, then who was it? Why would such an image appear in her mind? Chu Luiyue stood where he was, his expression blank and his eyes unfocused. Rong Xiao narrowed his eyes and took in the scene. He slowly clenched his hands behind his back. His phoenix eyes were deep and unfathomable. Chihan quickly noticed that something was wrong with Chu Luiyue. Master? Master? He shouted twice before Chu Luiyue came back to his senses. The profound formation in front of her was on the verge of collapsing. She subconsciously raised her hand to stabilize it. Seeing this, many people thought that Chu Luiyue was worried about Dumpling, so they didn't pay too much attention to it. Chihan frowned and felt that it was a little strange. Master, are you all right? Chu Luiyue lowered his eyes and shook his head. I'm fine. When Yu Qian saw this, he couldn't help but sneer. What? Aren't you going to chase after them? You have to know that it was you who forced her to do this. If Chu Luiyue had terminated the contract with Dumpling earlier, there wouldn't be so much trouble. They could only blame themselves for ending up in this state. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes and didn't say a word. After a while, she opened her eyes and turned around. She started to focus on studying the barrier around her. Her expression was unusually calm, as if she didn't care about anything around her. This time, not only Yu Qian, but also the people around them were dumbfounded. They couldn't help but look at each other. What did Chu Luiyue mean by this? Was she just going to let it go? On Dumpling's side, no matter what, that was her contracted magical beast. Weren't they still deeply in love with each other earlier? Why did they suddenly stop caring about each other just like that? Yu Qian, go and bring her back. The Divine Master said. Yes. Yu Qian received the order. He immediately became energized and headed outside. The main hall fell into silence again. Everyone knew that Dumpling was probably doomed this time. Many people looked at Chu Luiyue. However, her eyes were focused and her expression was calm. They couldn't see anything. It was as if all of this really had nothing to do with her. Zichen glanced at her. His eyes were deep, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. The people who were waiting outside the gate of the illusory god palace heard a clear and distant phoenix cry. They all looked up. A figure burning with golden flames rushed out of the main hall of the illusory god palace. That's the golden heavenly phoenix. Wasn't she brought back by Yu Qian? Why is she out now? Wait. She doesn't seem to be going out, but... The holy chaos jade. What is she doing there? Everyone was discussing. Under countless gazes, Dumpling stopped in the air above the holy chaos jade. The flames around her were burning fiercely. The scorching temperature almost reached the outside of the illusory god palace. Yu Qian, who rushed out of the illusory god palace, saw this scene. His eyelids twitched fiercely. Looking at the burning flames on the white jade pillars and then at Dumpling, who was hovering in the air, a strong sense of uneasiness surged in his heart. The flames on the white jade pillars were whoosh. The huge golden wings were like hanging clouds. When they flapped, they rolled up a gust of wind. In the next moment, the flames on the white jade pillars seemed to be summoned by a powerful force. They spread upward and went straight to Dumpling. Yu Qian was shocked. The flames were maintained by the golden heavenly phoenix's bloodline power. If Dumpling forcibly took all of its power, then the consequences would be unimaginable. The flames on the holy chaos jade burned for thousands of years without extinguishing. This was the symbol of the Divine Master's power. It was also the belief of the people in the illusory god palace. If the flames were extinguished, thinking of that terrible scene, Yu Qian felt unwell. For a long time, the divine envoys of the illusory god palace had been hiding a huge secret. And now, this secret was very likely to be exposed. If that was really the case, then all their previous efforts would be in vain. He had to stop her as soon as possible. Yu Qian didn't think and immediately flew toward Dumpling. But soon, he found that this method wouldn't work. Tuanzi was burning the power of her bloodline and using this to display her strongest strength. The flames were burning fiercely. It was impossible to get close to her. Not to mention other things. At the same time, the flames on the top of the white jade pillars were still rushing toward Dumpling. The flames on the pillars also gradually withered and extinguished. Everyone saw this scene. For a moment, everyone was speculating. What is that golden heavenly phoenix doing? Swallowing the flames on the holy chaos jade? Strange, isn't that the Divine Master's divine power transformed? Why is she snatching it? That's the strangest thing. This golden heavenly phoenix has only opened her 8th meridian. Logically speaking, it's impossible for her to snatch the Divine Master's power. But now. Moreover, the power in the flames seems to be moving toward her. Suddenly, a low voice came from the crowd. Since she's the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, then, she should be able to summon the power of her own clansmen, right? The flames on the white jade pillar were also surging towards her. The terrifyingly high temperature made it almost impossible for people to get close. And Dumpling, who was in the middle of it, had also begun to get injured. A faint burning aura permeated the air. It seemed to be mixed with the smell of blood that could not be ignored. Yu Qian, on the other hand, was standing not far away. He was trying his best to stop Tuanzi with all kinds of methods. Wounds appeared all over her body. But her movements did not stop. Instead, it seemed to be even crazier. From afar, it looked like a reddish-gold flame burning fiercely in midair. Hong Yao's eyes flashed with a deep sense of panic. Then, almost without hesitation, it turned around and ran towards the main hall of the illusory god palace. The movement outside the main hall naturally attracted the attention of the people in the hall. Fan Yunxiao looked outside and frowned. She looked at Mu Qinghe and asked in a low voice, "First messenger, that crimson gold sky phoenix is stubborn. Now that things have come to this, it even intends to burn itself. Do you think we should also take action? Mu Qinghe's expression did not change. At this moment, a blue shadow suddenly flew in from outside. Mu Dongyu immediately became alert. Who dares to trespass into the main hall of the illusory god palace? Before his voice died away, he had already raised his hand and was about to take action. However, at this moment, an astonishing and vast force suddenly attacked and stopped him. He turned around in shock, only to see that the person who stopped him was Mu Qinghe. First God, before he could finish his sentence, he saw the blue sparrow stumbling in the next moment and directly bumping into Mu Qinghe. He raised his hand and caught Hong Yao. He frowned, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of coldness. Who allowed you to come in? Mu Dongyu and the others were stunned when they saw this. This is the first messenger's demon beast? Hong Yao was restrained by him and could not move. It could only look up at him. That pair of clear and beautiful ruby-like eyes were already brimming with tears at this moment. Hearing his question, the boiling hot tears fell like pearls from a broken necklace. It bit Mu Qinghe's sleeve with all its might, stubbornly. Dumpling. That's Dumpling. Why don't you save her? Didn't you like her the most in the past? Now that she's about to die, why don't you help her? Why? Seeing this, Fan Yinxiao asked tentatively. First messenger, your contracted demon beast, seems to have feelings for that crimson gold sky phoenix? Anyone could tell that it was here to plead for mercy. But, what was its relationship with Dumpling? Was she worth it? Moreover, it was a little strange that it came to beg the first messenger at this time. Mu Qinghe said coldly, the crimson gold sky phoenix is an ancient divine beast and the king of all beasts. If she chooses to burn herself, this blue sparrow will not be the only one who will mourn. As he spoke, he looked down at Hong Yao again. If you want to save her, go ahead. Life and death are all in your hands. Chapter 2462. As he spoke, he let go of his hand. Hong Yao was stunned for a moment and almost fell to the ground. It opened its eyes and looked at Mu Qinghe, as if it was thinking about the meaning of his words just now. Life and death, between a thought. In other words, he would let it go, but no matter what, he would not interfere. Even if it died with Dumpling, it would be the same. Fan Yinxiao paused and said, First divine envoy, this cyan sparrow is not a divine beast. If it dies, it must be. Since you chose it as your contracted magical beast, you must like it. It would be a pity if it dies. In his impression, the first divine envoy had never contracted any magical beast. He did not know when this cyan sparrow had been accepted by him. But now was obviously not the time to ask about this. Moreover, this cyan sparrow was very likely to die. Mu Qinghe suddenly glanced at him coldly. Third divine envoy, are you giving me advice? Fan Yinxiao suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He hurriedly said, First divine envoy, you misunderstood. Meeting that cold gaze, he suddenly choked and could not say the rest of his words. In reality, the two sentences he had just said were indeed probing. However, the first divine envoy was too sharp and hit the nail on the head. Fan Yinxiao's lips trembled, and his face turned slightly pale. He really shouldn't have tried to do anything to the first divine envoy. At this moment, Hong Yao suddenly turned around and left. However, before it could rush out, it heard a familiar voice. Zi Chen, stop it. Zi Chen immediately moved. Hong Yao was no match for him at all and was immediately stopped. Hong Yao's tears kept falling as it turned to look at Chu Luiyue. She did not raise her head, nor did she even look at Hong Yao. From Hong Yao's point of view, it could only see her slightly pursed lips. She doesn't care about her contracted magical beast, but she cares about other people's magical beasts. Fan Yinxiao felt even more strange when she saw this scene. She could not help but frown and mutter softly. Chu Luiyue pretended not to hear anything. At this moment, most of the profound formations around her had already been outlined. Anyone would think that she had placed all her attention on the Xian formation. As for what was happening outside, she no longer cared about it. However, even if she really didn't care, the people in the illusory god palace couldn't just sit by and watch. The holy primal chaos jade was of great significance to the palace of the illusory god. How could they allow Dumpling to swallow all the flames they had accumulated with great difficulty? On the white jade pillar, the flame became weaker and weaker. That undying flame that had burned for 10,000 years seemed to be on the verge of collapse. First divine envoy, bring the crimson gold celestial phoenix back. Finally, the divine master gave another order. This time, Muqinghe, who was the strongest among the oracles, was appointed. He bowed and nodded. Yes. After saying that, he immediately walked out of the hall without hesitation. When passing by Zichen, Hong Yao glanced at him. However, he did not look sideways and did not give any response. His face was as cold as an iceberg that would not melt for 1,000 years. It was untouchable. Muqinghe soon arrived in front of the holy primal chaos jade. Almost without any hesitation, a long sword appeared in his hand. Then, he held the sword with both hands and slashed down. Whoosh! A terrifying sword energy rushed out quickly. Wherever it passed, the void collapsed. The next moment, everyone was shocked to see that the flame that was rushing toward Dumpling was finally cut in half. Then, the sword did not stop but continued to move toward Dumpling. Dumpling sensed the danger. However, she still did not move. Whoosh! A sound that made one's scalp tingle was heard. The sword directly slashed on one of Dumpling's wings, cutting off a large piece of feathers and flesh. Screech! An extremely painful shriek resounded through the world. Whoosh! Soon, the sword flew back to Muqinghe's hand. His expression was cold, and without any hesitation, he slashed toward the second flame. Everyone heard that sound clearly. Chu Luiyue was no exception. Furthermore, because of the contract, she could almost vividly experience the intense pain of having her skin peeled off and her flesh sliced off. She clenched her teeth, and between her lips and teeth, a strong smell of blood filled the air. It was as if a knife was slicing her heart again and again. She stared at the countless light spots in front of her, and her fingertips trembled slightly. She did not turn back, but continued to cast a ray of light with determination, outlining the Xian formation. Countless images seemed to appear in her mind. Some of them were her memories, and some were scenes that had never appeared before. Every scene was like watching a lantern on horseback. However, most of the images were very blurry, and she could not see them clearly. After a long time, her head seemed to be in so much pain that it was about to explode, and gradually, those images became blurred. She couldn't even tell what had happened and what hadn't. Or perhaps, all of this was the truth. Dark red blood flowed from the corner of her lips, and her vision turned black. At this moment, there was only one voice in her heart. Must ascend to the heavens and become a god as soon as possible. It was also because of this that she gritted her teeth and held on until now. However, at this moment, that low and hoarse voice sounded again. The purple gold divine armor belongs to the high priest. You should return it. If the high priest saw this, he would definitely be happy. High priest, don't you think so? Chu Liuyue's heart shook, and she finally could not help but look up. Chapter 2463. Inside the palace of the illusory god, a huge bronze mirror slowly appeared in front of everyone. And the scene inside was clearly seen by everyone present. In the dark and cramped cage, a figure sat alone. The surrounding light was dim. Even just looking at it, it wasn't hard to imagine how gloomy and cold that place was. However, Chu Luiyue couldn't care less about this. She opened her eyes and stared at the figure in the mirror without blinking. That person wore a dark purple brocade robe and sat quietly. Even in such an inhuman environment, it still couldn't hide his noble and arrogant aura. He lowered his head slightly, emitting a cold aura, and didn't move at all. However, the moment she saw him, Chu Liuyue's eyes instantly heated up. It was as if something had surged into her heart at this moment and fiercely attacked it. She bit her lips tightly, and her knuckles turned white. She didn't know how much strength she used to suppress the scream that was about to burst out. It's been too long since I've seen him. Chu Liuyue's nails dug into her palms, and she used the sharp pain to maintain her last bit of clarity and rationality. Years had passed since they parted in the Red Moon Desert. During this time, she kept looking for their whereabouts, but she couldn't find anything. Even after guessing that they were trapped in the palace of the illusory god, she could only bide her time and wait day and night. She had imagined countless scenes of them meeting again, but she never thought that it would be in such a situation. She didn't dare to blink, and her eyes carefully scanned his body. Is he injured? Did he suffer a lot during the time he was trapped? What about Lan Xiao? He wasn't locked in the same place as him? Did he blame her for coming too late? Countless thoughts surfaced in Chu Liuyue's mind, and she felt suffocated. As if sensing her gaze, the Duga Mabao finally moved. He slowly raised his head and looked over. It was a pair of clear and unpredictable purple eyes. In the dark space, it was like the only light gathered. His eyes were like an ancient well without any ripples, as if nothing could affect him at all. It was only when his gaze landed on her that some of the ice and snow in his eyes melted away, spreading a faint trace of warmth. However, this expression disappeared in an instant. Then, his gaze turned cold. Divine Lord, are you planning to return the purple gold divine armor to me? As his voice fell, the entire main hall of the illusory god palace fell into a deathly silence. The High Priest. This was actually the High Priest. He was once a top expert of the illusory god palace, unparalleled in the world. Now, how did he turn into a child? Not only were the cultivators who were attempting to ascend to the heavens deeply shocked by this scene, but even the god emissaries who were also present revealed expressions of disbelief. Fan Yinxiao and the others gasped and looked at each other subconsciously. Then, they saw the same shock and astonishment in each other's eyes. Before this, the High Priest had never appeared in front of anyone. Everything about him was handled by the Divine Lord himself. Therefore, this was the first time they had seen the former High Priest. This was clearly different from the rumors. Xiao Ran also stopped what he was doing and widened his eyes in shock. High Priest. His impression of this person was still from 10,000 years ago, when he was still young. At that time, he only remembered the High Priest wearing the purple gold divine armor and exuding an imposing aura. Although he had only seen him from afar, and a long time had passed, and his memories had become blurry. However, there was one thing he could be sure of. The former High Priest was definitely not the child he was now. In fact, there were many people who had seen the High Priest back then. Unlike the high and mighty emperor who could not be reached, the High Priest belonged to the illusory god palace and held great power. He was in charge of many affairs for the Divine Lord. To the Divine Lord, he was both a teacher and a friend. It was the same for the second priest. The 13 god emissaries under the Divine Lord had always obeyed the Divine Lord's orders. Only the High Priest and the second priest could compete with the Divine Lord. The Divine Lord had always been very respectful to these two. However, when the illusory god palace rebelled back then, countless cultivators had died with it, leaving only a few young ones. So now, most people had no impression of the High Priest. Even the god emissaries were the same. But, how could this be? I do have such a plan, the Divine Lord said. However, what happened back then is still vivid in my mind. The High Priest betrayed the illusory god palace and caused countless cultivators to die in that chaos. You violated the contract and reforged your divine body without permission. You have committed many crimes. If I return the purple gold divine armor to you so easily, I'm afraid it will be difficult to convince the others. Duga Mabao's lips curled into an extremely cold smile. If you don't want to return it, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush? High Priest, you are wrong. 10,000 years have passed. Everything in the past will eventually pass. For the sake of our past relationship, I am willing to take a step back. As long as you destroy your divine body, I will return the purple gold divine armor to you. From then on, we will be even. How about that? Chu Luiyue looked at the figure. Asking Dugu Mabao to destroy his divine body? What was the difference between this and asking for his life? He, Lan Shao, and the others had been trapped in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years. It was not easy for him to rebuild his divine body. If he destroyed it again, there would be no hope for him to do it again. By then, what difference would there be between him and a lonely soul? There would be no point in asking for the purple gold divine armor. This was not a negotiation at all. It was a humiliation. As expected, Dugu Mabao smiled mockingly as if he had heard a joke. Then, he did not give any reply. He only closed his eyes gently. It was obvious that he did not want to say anything more to the Divine Lord. The atmosphere in the hall became cold and stagnant. The Divine Lord was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was still emotionless as if he had already guessed his choice. The High Priest is indeed as stubborn as before. In that case, don't blame me for not taking our past relationship into account, High Priest. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad feeling. The next moment, he heard the voice continue. Jun Zhuqing. With this shout, everyone's attention was instantly focused on Jun Zhuqing. Jun Zhuqing bowed. Yes, my lord. The illusory god palace does not need disloyal people. If you can ascend to the heavens and become a god, the position of the high priest will be yours. This sentence was earth-shattering, and it instantly shocked everyone present to the point that they were all stunned. They knew that Jun Zhuqing had a special identity, but they did not expect him to be the successor of the high priest that the Divine Lord had chosen long ago. Chu Luiyue frowned and looked at Jun Zhuqing. He lowered his eyes and replied respectfully. Yes. I will not disappoint the Divine Lord. Chapter 2464. Just like that, the choice of the High Priestess had been decided. Even Fan Yunxiao and the others were unable to recover from their shock for a long time. In fact, it was not that no one had discussed this issue in the past 10,000 years. The former High Priest and Second Priest had betrayed the Master God and almost destroyed the entire palace of the illusory god. Naturally, they could not continue to hold the position. After the Master God quelled the chaos, he reselected the 13 divine messengers. However, no one had taken up the position of High Priest. Everyone thought that the Master God had been betrayed and refused to choose a High Priest. Therefore, no one had publicly mentioned this matter for many years. Who knew? The Master God had just announced that the position was reserved for Jun Zhuqing. As long as he could ascend to the heavens and become a god, the position of High Priest would be within his reach. Putting everything else aside, Jun Zhuqing's talent was unquestionable. He was almost destined to succeed. In other words, he was determined to get the position of High Priest. For a moment, even the divine messengers could not help but feel a little uncomfortable. One had to know that the High Priest was more honorable than the divine messengers. Even the first divine messenger could not be compared to him. Although they knew that Jun Zhuqing had an extraordinary background and was deeply cared for by the Master God, this was still a little sudden. Chu Luiyue's brows were tightly knitted. Jun Zhuqing's expression was very calm, as if he was not surprised by this. In fact, he seemed to think that it was natural. Where did his confidence come from? As if sensing her gaze, Jun Zhuqing suddenly looked in her direction. His eyes flickered as he looked at her ambiguously. Then, he quickly looked away. Chu Luiyue could not describe that feeling. In short, she felt that it was very strange. At the same time, there was another person whose emotions were fluctuating greatly, Nan Jinshu. After hearing the Master God's promise to Jun Zhuqing, his heart beat faster. Others might not know the reasons, but he knew. Back then, the earth-shattering chaos in the palace of the illusory god had lasted for a long time. Moreover, it had directly conquered the divine ruins world. It was the battle of the gods in the god-slaying mound. Countless high gods and high gods participated in that battle, resulting in countless casualties. Even after 10,000 years had passed, there was still a strong bloody aura lingering in the air. At that time, the two ancestors of the family Yi and the Nan family were deeply trusted by the Divine Master and participated in the battle together. In the end, he managed to come out alive with great difficulty. After the chaotic battle, the zither score was divided into 3 parts and scattered all over the world. Once she ascended to the heavens and became a god, it seemed like many things would start to develop in an unpredictable direction. There was a door in front of her, waiting for her to open it. Even she didn't know what was waiting for her behind the door. She held her breath and connected the last few dots of the Xian formation. Finally, buzz. As she landed on the last point, an extremely tyrannical fluctuation spread out from the Xian formation around her. Everyone turned to look at him. She's going to succeed? Chu Luiyue clenched her fists and waited quietly. However, at this moment, a star in front of her suddenly dimmed. She was stunned. Then, the countless stars and flowing lights around her sank into the darkness. A thought came to her mind. Did she fail to ascend to the heavens and become a god? Chapter 2465. Darkness. Silence. With her as the center, the stars around her all fell like meteors and were extinguished. Even the ripple from before had completely quieted down and could no longer be sensed. Chu Luiyue was stunned and subconsciously raised her hand. The dimmed light spots in front of her instantly dissipated. In an instant, it was as if a gust of wind had swept over and swept everything away. A chill rose from the bottom of her heart and gradually spread, surrounding her. Chu Luiyue's lips moved, but she was speechless. Her mind was blank for a moment. How did this happen? Everyone in the hall was stunned when they saw this scene. After a long while, someone asked in a low voice with uncertainty. What's going on? Shengguan, you failed? No one answered. However, everyone already had a definite answer in their hearts. She had indeed failed. That Xian formation could be said to be perfect. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any problems. But she had failed. Even though there were many twists and turns before this, Chu Luiyue never stopped what she was doing. Her Xian formation was complete and smooth from beginning to end. Even the god envoys who didn't like her had tacitly agreed that she would succeed. After all, among all the cultivators present, she was the most outstanding one. Although the others were also considered geniuses, they were still lacking compared to her. How could she fail? It seems that without the power of the bloodline, it's indeed impossible to break through the final shackle. After a long while, Fan Yinshao seemed to have thought of something and muttered in a low voice. After hearing his words, many people in the surroundings came back to their senses. That's right. With her extraordinary talent and strength, wasn't this the only reason why she couldn't ascend to the heavens and become a god? Without the bloodline totem, there was no bloodline power. Such a person would naturally have a harder time cultivating than others. Ascending to the heavens and becoming a god was even more impossible. This was also why the illusory god palace had always looked down on such people. When Chu Luiyue and the others came up, the attitude of Jin Yunlai and the others changed drastically just because they did not have a bloodline totem. That was not without reason. However, in the past year, Chu Luiyue's performance was too outstanding, so everyone gradually neglected this point. Especially after she finished walking the Star Road and deciphered all the profound formations on it, everyone had a whole new level of respect for her. She had finished the Star Path, and she had entered the palace of the illusory god openly. Then, perhaps it was not impossible for her to ascend to the heavens and become a god? Not only her, but even Chi Han and the others had the same attitude. Therefore, at this moment, everyone was very surprised. Chu Liuyue's eyelids drooped slightly and his brows furrowed slightly. Did he fail because he didn't have the power of his bloodline? However, she clearly had it. It was just that no one had noticed it before. She was certain that there was absolutely no problem with the Xian formation that she had used. Then, the key lies in her. Could it really be that there was a problem with the power of his bloodline? Chu Liyue could not help but raise her hand and gently rub the space between her brows. There was no movement. In the past, the totem would always appear when she was in danger. However, this time, for some reason, there was no response at all. Chu Liyue could not do anything about the power of his bloodline in her body. Because it was not under her control at all. Appearing or disappearing was never determined by her will. Therefore, even if she wanted to summon it now, it was still futile. Seeing her actions, Fan Yunxiao could not help but snort softly. Bloodline totem, there is no such thing as a bloodline totem. You should have thought of the current situation when you first entered the heaven gate. It was too late for regrets now. Chu Liyue ignored him. At this moment, another fluctuation came from the side. Buzz. She turned her head to look and realized that it came from the Xian formation in front of Qi Han. He was extremely talented in this area as well. He had almost completed the Xian formation right after Chu Liyue. Looking at the twinkling stars that surrounded him, Chu Liyue's heart suddenly stopped. Qi Han also did not have the power of his bloodline. Moreover, unlike her, he really did not have it in his body. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she heard a soft sound. Immediately after, a star in front of Qi Han also dimmed instantly. Chu Liyue's heart sank. In the next moment, the twinkling stars around him dimmed as well. It was exactly the same as Chu Liyue's failure earlier. Perhaps it was because Chu Liyue had already set a precedent, but when they saw this situation again, the crowd was no longer as shocked and surprised as they were at the beginning. In fact, some people even revealed an "as expected" expression, as if they had already expected such an outcome. Qi Han has also failed. I remember that he doesn't have a bloodline totem either, right? Even if such a cultivator enters the illusory god palace, he will still not be able to reach the highest level. What a pity. They are indeed quite talented in this aspect. If I remember correctly, most of the people in Shangguanyu do not have a bloodline totem. Yes. That little Hachi, as well as Jian Fengqi and Mu Hongyu, they are all like that. Although they are not done yet, I don't think there is much hope for them. Everyone was discussing fervently, and all kinds of voices were heard. Qi Han frowned slightly, then waved his sleeves, dispelling all the twinkling stars around him. However, the strange thing was that there did not seem to be much disappointment on his face. He looked as if he did not care about this matter at all. Or perhaps, he had already expected this outcome, so when it happened, he appeared much calmer. Chu Liyue stood beside him, taking in all the subtle changes in his expression. She had always known him very well. Therefore, she was also a little stunned. Qi Han. Hearing this, Qi Han looked over and bowed. Master, Qi Han is useless. Chu Liyue shook her head, held her forehead helplessly, and laughed bitterly. There is no need for that. After all, even I have failed. After a pause, she looked at him carefully again. You knew that you would fail? Yes. Qi Han nodded frankly. When I saw Master fail just now, I guessed it. Chu Liyue pursed her lips. No cultivator did not want to succeed in breaking through. No one would feel good if they failed just like that. Suddenly, a familiar, cold, and low voice sounded. The mystic master has failed to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Do you still want to continue? Chapter 2466. Chu Liyue turned to look at him. The person who spoke was Rongxiu. His handsome and enchanting face was cold and calm. His question was also very normal, as if he did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Before Chu Luiyue could reply, Fan Yunxiao could not help but say, "Celestial Emperor, Shanghai Yu has already failed. How can we continue?" Ah! A strong force suddenly came from behind him. He was caught off guard and immediately fell forward. He staggered a few steps before he managed to stabilize himself. He turned around in shock and anger. "Second in charge. What are you doing? To suddenly launch a sneak attack like this, wasn't it a little too careless?" Yan Gu retracted his hand, crossed his arms, and said lazily, "If the Celestial Emperor says that we can continue, then we can continue. Who are you to question him? Who are you to speak to the Celestial Emperor like that?" You, Fan Yunxiao was humiliated in front of everyone. He was furious. However, he could not refute Yan Ji's words. He took a deep breath and retorted, "How can you tell that I'm questioning the Celestial Emperor? I just feel that it's a little strange, that's why I asked." Why did he have to attack him so suddenly? Yan Gu sneered and looked at him from the corner of his eyes. The Celestial Emperor is the sole authority of cultivators to ascend to the heavens and enter the Pantheon record. Even the Divine Master has no right to interfere, let alone you. Do you really think you're that important just because I call you the third Divine Envoy? Fan Yunxiao's face turned pale. Yan Gu usually did not like him. No, to be precise, he was very impatient with the other Divine Envoys. However, those disputes and quarrels happened in private. It was fine if everyone tolerated each other. But now, he actually dared to mock him in front of everyone. He could not help but look in the Divine Master's direction. "Second in charge is right," the Divine Master said lightly. Fan Yunxiao choked on his words. After thinking for a long time, she finally swallowed her anger and waved her sleeves. "Humph. I'd like to see what other abilities she has, to ascend to the heavens and break through the gods." Rong Xiu glanced at Fan Yunxiao. His eyes were extremely indifferent and cold. Whether she succeeds or not is only related to I. What's the matter? Does the third oracle wish to share I's burden? Fan Yunxiao's heart skipped a beat. The color on her face immediately disappeared, leaving behind a deathly pale face. If the Emperor said that, then he was really angry. He hurriedly explained. "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. I really don't have any other intentions. His voice gradually trailed off. That person's aura was too strong, to the extent that even breathing became a little difficult, and his entire body was ice cold. He was very clear that if he continued to speak, what awaited him would not be a simple reprimand. Fan Yunxiao obediently shut her mouth. When everyone saw this, they all suppressed the waves in their hearts. Whether a cultivator could ascend to the heavens and become a god was indeed only related to the Emperor. After all, he was the one in control of the Pantheon record. Fan Yunxiao was purely asking for trouble. Of all the people to provoke, why did she have to cause trouble in front of the Emperor? Wasn't she courting death? Chu Liuyue's hands gradually tightened in her sleeves. She took a deep breath and asked, "Emperor, how do you intend to continue? Other than being a mystic master, there are 3 other paths." Rong Xiu's tone was calm, and his phoenix eyes were cold. Chu Luiyue understood. So that was what he meant. Many people secretly exchanged glances when they heard this. Actually, there was nothing wrong with the Emperor's method. After all, Chu Luiyue was publicly acknowledged as an all-rounder. Not only was she a great grandmaster, but her performance in other aspects had always been very outstanding. It was just that when she walked the star path previously, she had left a deep impression on everyone, so they subconsciously felt that she should make such a choice. In fact, she was also a god, a doctor, and a weapon refiner at the same time. Why couldn't such a person choose? Only she would have the chance to continue. If it were someone else, even if the Emperor allowed her to continue, she probably wouldn't have the strength to do so. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment. Many cultivators around also looked over, secretly guessing what choice she would make. After a moment, she said, I choose martial artist. Rong Xiu's gaze swept across her face. Permitted. Chu Luiyue was about to leave. Xiao Ran, who was beside her, had a look of regret. He had always thought that Chu Luiyue would definitely be the first mystic master to ascend to the heavens and become a god. He didn't expect such a situation to happen. Even with her amazing talent, she couldn't succeed. It was really a pity. Xiao Ran still felt quite uncomfortable. On one hand, he had always liked this little girl. Although she was young, she was gentle, polite, and very intelligent. She didn't bully the weak and wasn't cowardly to the strong. The attitude of the people of Illusion God Palace towards her went from disdain at the beginning to admiration later. It was almost a 180-degree change. But she didn't seem to take it to heart. She was neither servile nor overbearing and firmly proved herself step by step, using strength to speak. On the other hand, it was thanks to her that he could successfully solve the last Xian formation on the star path. Of course, he was grateful. But without the bloodline totem, Chu Luiyue looked up and smiled at him. Senior Xiao Ran, don't worry. Everyone has their own fate. But you should be almost done, right? Xiao Ran's progress was only a bit slower than Qi Han's. Soon, it would be over. He wasn't affected by the bloodline totem. As long as everything went smoothly, he would definitely be able to enter the first volume of the Pantheon record. Xiao Ran looked at her and saw that the girl in front of him had a pure smile and clear eyes. She seemed to be unaffected by what had just happened. His heart skipped a beat, and he nodded. Thank you. If I succeed, I'll wait for you. Even though Chu Luiyue failed to become a Xian master and most likely failed because of the bloodline totem, he still felt that Chu Luiyue had hope. Such a person should stand at the top of a mountain and be admired by millions. Chu Luiyue's smile deepened. Okay. As she spoke, she suddenly thought of something and looked at Rongxiu. Emperor, Qi Han is also a god. Can he come with me? Rongxiu nodded. Sure. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows and waved at Qi Han. Qi Han followed her. When they passed by Zichen, the God Master's voice suddenly came from behind. Just now, you were trying to ascend to the heavens and become a god, so I didn't disturb you. Since you're free now, return the purple gold divine armor. Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks. Zichen's expression hardened. He took half a step forward and shielded Chu Luiyue behind him. The God Master seemed to chuckle. You can't possibly be thinking that a three-eyed godly eagle can truly protect this purple gold divine armor, right? Chu Luiyue patted Zichen's shoulder lightly and took the purple gold divine armor back. At that moment, another wail came from outside the palace. That's Dumpling's voice. The God Master continued. If you return the purple gold divine armor, I'll let that crimson gold celestial phoenix go. Chu Luiyue's hands suddenly tightened. Chapter 2467. Although she didn't know why the Divine Lord wanted to return the purple gold godly armor, there had to be a reason for his insistence. It was very likely that it would affect Debao's life and death. Chu Luiyue clenched the purple gold godly armor in her hand. The sharp edge of the dagger pricked her palm painfully. If she returned it, Dumpling would be saved, but Debao would be in even more danger. If she didn't return it, it would be the other way around. On one side was Dumpling, and on the other was Debao. How should she choose? Both of them were too important to her. At this moment, Dugu Mabao opened his eyes. He looked straight at Chu Luiyue and shook his head. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Debao meant, have you made your choice? That deep and hoarse voice sounded again. Countless gazes swept over. Clearly, they were also very curious about what Chu Luiyue would choose. Chu Luiyue held her breath and said coldly. I won't choose either of these two choices. If you want the purple gold godly armor, come and take it yourself. If you want me to return it to you. Impossible. The Divine Lord paused. So, you choose the High Priestess and give up the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix? Chu Luyue sneered. Divine Lord, don't you think your question is laughable? Even if I return it to you, will you really let Dumpling go? After what she had experienced, she wasn't so naive. What they wanted was Dumpling's bloodline power, and it was very likely the power after opening the 9th meridian. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done so many things for no reason, such as urging Dumpling to open her meridians. Everything they did was for a reason. At first, she didn't quite understand, but ever since Dumpling flew out of the illusory god palace, went to the sky above the holy chaos jade, and began to devour the flames on the white jade pillar, she knew their goal. The flames on the pillar were supported by the bloodline power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Previously, Xiaoran had mentioned that the holy chaos jade was closely related to the Divine Lord, and that the flames on the white jade pillar were formed by the Divine Lord's divine power and wouldn't be extinguished for thousands of years. But in fact, that wasn't the case. She still remembered the scene when she saw Yi Zhao in the lightning pool. At that time, a lot of his bloodline power had also been sucked away. However, Chu Liyue's mind was filled with thoughts of how to save him back then, so she didn't pay much attention to it. She just treated it as a form of torture from the illusory god palace. But now, she understood that what they wanted was the bloodline power of the Crimson Gold Celestial Phoenix clan, which was used to fuel the flames of the primal chaos holy jade. The pure bloodline power, the bloodline power. Although Yi Zhao was the clan leader, he had only opened the 7th meridian. It was probably not enough. Divine Lord T's power, T's SS divines. She had the purest bloodline. Dumpling's importance to them was self-evident. Under these circumstances, how could they let Dumpling go so easily? Are you doubting me? The Divine Lord's voice turned cold. Chu Luyue snorted. So what if I am? No one expected Chu Luyue to be so stubborn. For a moment, they all fell silent. You, the Divine Master, also seemed to be a little angry. At this moment, Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. Shangguanyu has yet to complete the Ascension to Divinity test. His voice was cold and chilly, causing others to unconsciously revere him and not dare to disobey. His meaning was clear. Everything else had to be pushed to the back. Even if the Divine Lord really wanted to take the violet gold divine armor, he would have to wait until everything was over. After a while, the Divine Lord said, "As your Majesty wishes." Chu Luyue turned and walked toward the martial artists. At this moment, she was facing the gate of the palace of the illusory god. A sorrowful and painful cry was heard again. Screech. Chu Liyue's heart trembled. She instinctively looked up. Outside the gate, she saw what was happening. Mu Qinghe was floating in the air. A long sword flew out from his hand and charged forward. Screech. The flames that were surging toward Dumpling from the top of the white jade pillar left a crimson gold trail in the air. This sword strike had directly cut it in half. 3 trails of fire had already been cut in half. This was the 4th. After that, the sword did not stop. Instead, it continued to fly toward Dumpling. The sword energy was awe-inspiring. In the next moment, the sharp edge of the sword sliced through Dumpling's left wing. Screech. Large patches of burnt feathers were shaved off along with their skin and flesh. The massive crimson gold figure also trembled. The cry was hoarse and sorrowful, like a whimper. It lingered in the air for a long time. A part of Chu Liyue's heart seemed to have been cut off. It was painful. Her chest felt like it was being pressed down by a huge rock. She could only gasp for air. However, every time she breathed, a large amount of cold air rushed into her chest. It was as if there were thorns in it, cutting through her. She clutched her heart. It was so painful that it was about to split open. She instinctively walked forward. However, the moment she lifted her foot, her legs turned to jelly. Her body fell toward the ground uncontrollably. Master. Chi-Han immediately went forward to support her. Chu Luiyue pressed her heart with one hand and held Chi-Han's arm with the other. Her fingertips were pale. It was as if someone was holding a huge axe and crazily chopping down on her mind. Double images appeared in front of her eyes again. Countless images overlapped. It was difficult to distinguish. It was as if there were countless sorrowful cries echoing in her ears. Digression, 60 clock. Chapter 2468. Her lips trembled as she spat out a few muffled syllables with difficulty. E. That name was engraved in the deepest part of her heart, coiling between her lips and teeth, but she couldn't shout it out no matter what. It was as if a few forces were crazily pulling at her thoughts, almost tearing her apart. Chi-Han's pupils constricted. He raised his eyes and looked outside the door of the main hall. The reddish-gold flames burned fiercely as if they were going to burn everything to ashes. Suddenly, Chu Luiyue's body stiffened. Then, she slowly straightened up and let go of her hand. Chi-Han immediately came back to his senses. Master? Her current appearance was really. Chu Luiyue lowered her eyes, her thick and long eyelashes covering the ripples in her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking at this moment. She shook her head, indicating that she was fine. Then, she half-turned and went into the martial artist's circle area. Her footsteps were very slow, as if every step exhausted all her strength. Then, she turned her back. It was as if she wanted to leave the voice that broke her heart behind. Everyone's eyes were focused on her alone. The crimson gold heavenly phoenix was in danger. Even they felt a chill in their hearts when they heard that voice, let alone Chu Luiyue, who was its master. Chu Luiyue slowly raised her head. Everyone was stunned. The woman's face didn't have the expected sadness and pain. Instead, it was calm. Even her starry eyes had sunk into darkness, completely silent and without any ripples. It was like an eternal night, silent and cold. Many people looked at each other. Chu Luiyue. Why did she have such a reaction? She was very close to that crimson gold heavenly phoenix. Seeing that it was being tortured like this, she was actually indifferent? Or, to her, ascending to the heavens and becoming a god was more important than everything else? But no matter what the reason was, she looked a little strange. In other words, her entire person seemed to have changed. No one spoke. It was quiet all around. Chu Luiyue lifted the hem of her clothes and sat cross-legged. Her hands formed a seal in front of her and she gently closed her eyes. In the next moment, the surrounding heaven and earth energy began to surge wildly into her body. Compared to the other areas, the number of martial artists was the highest. Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu were here too. Seeing Chu Luiyue coming over, everyone had different expressions. Was she really so calm? Chi-Han quickly caught up. When he sensed those gazes, his expression turned cold. Then, he stood guard beside Chu Luiyue. Those people faintly sensed his warning and reined themselves in. At this time, it was time for him to focus on himself. Besides, based on Chu Luiyue's performance at the Mystic Master's side just now, he would probably fail again this time. There was nothing to be concerned about. Time passed slowly. Inside the main hall of the illusory god palace, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Zichen was looking at Chu Luiyue when he suddenly felt that his sleeves were wet. When the wind blew, it brought with it a bone-chilling coldness. He lowered his head to take a look. Red Demon was curled up in his hand, staring blankly in the direction of the door. It was expressionless, and its eyes seemed to be in a daze. Only hot tears kept falling. It was very useless, so it could only watch Dumpling suffer. At this moment, the one who brought it all this pain and suffering was its master, whom it had followed for many years. It could not help much. After all, it was not even a divine beast. Pleading, threatening, begging, it had already done everything it could. But, it was still useless. Zichen looked up slightly. He stood there, his tall figure motionless. The scene outside the door was clearly reflected in his eyes. That flame seemed to be burning the bottom of his heart. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and veins were faintly bulging on his forehead. He stared straight ahead, as if he wanted to imprint everything deeply into his bones and blood. Xue Xue came to Rong Xiu's feet and whimpered. Rong Xiu's expression did not change. Xue Xue lowered its head and buried it. After an unknown period of time, at a certain moment, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the Xian formation in front of Xiao Ran. He held his breath and focused, extremely nervous. Previously, Chu Luiyue and Qi Han had failed one after another, which indeed made him worried. Hence, at this moment, he did not even dare to breathe loudly, afraid that it would affect something. Everyone turned to look at him as well. Then, there was a second buzzing sound. And the commotion this time was obviously stronger than before. Xiao Ran's throat was dry, and he did not blink. Then, countless stars gathered and condensed into a dazzling ball of light, floating quietly in front of Xiao Ran. At the same time, a totem appeared between his brows. Swoosh! That ball of light instantly entered between his brows. The next moment, Xiao Ran's aura began to rise rapidly. Rong Xiu suddenly raised his hand. A thick layer of light enveloped Xiao Ran. Almost at this moment, the Pantheon record, which was floating beside Rong Xiu, suddenly exploded with a bright light. After a moment, a name was engraved on it, Xiao Ran. While all this was happening in the main hall, the huge projection of the Pantheon record in the sky above the illusory god palace also began to produce intense energy waves. Hearing the commotion, the people waiting outside the door all became spirited and scrambled to look over. The Pantheon record is moving. Is someone finally going to ascend to the heavens and become a god? I wonder who will be the first to die. Could it be Sheng Wanyu? She's the one with the most potential among those people, right? I think it's possible. She even finished the star path without much effort, so it's only logical for her to ascend to the heavens and become a god. That might not be the case. Don't forget, she doesn't have a bloodline totem. In the past, there has never been such a person who successfully crossed that threshold, right? But she's different from those people. If that's the case, there hasn't been such a person who successfully entered the illusory god palace before. Didn't she do it too? Look. That person's name appeared. Someone in the crowd shouted loudly, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Everyone had a tacit understanding and looked up at the same time. On the Pantheon record, a dazzling golden name slowly appeared. Xiao Ran. When they saw these two words clearly, the noisy crowd instantly quieted down. After a while, everyone gradually reacted and looked at each other in shock. The first. Why is it Xiao Ran? It wasn't that Xiao Ran shouldn't appear on the Pantheon record, but that he appeared a little too early. Generally speaking, martial artists were the fastest to ascend to the heavens and become gods, followed by mystic masters or celestial physician. Artificers were the slowest. Xiao Ran was a mystic master. How could he be the first? Moreover, even if a mystic master was the first, there was still Chu Luiyue and Qi Han before him. Why didn't the names of those two appear? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.